Okay, so as we said last time we met, this week or this Wednesday today, we're going to be working on finishing lab. I believe it's lab 5, which is the first batch of enemy characters that we're creating, right? So we've already seen the stationary mine. We're going to start working on the homing missile. So I'll just recap what we did with the stationary mine because we're going to be using a lot of that to create the homing missile with, at least the explosion part and that thing, and then we're going to be adding to it. So basically, each one of the enemy characters, we're going to keep adding another thing to it. So then that way it becomes more complex, more complex. And then at the end of it, at least by the time we finish the lab 7, because lab 6 is navigation. So by the time we finish lab 7, let's see. There we go. All right, so by the time we finish lab 7, then we will have very complex characters, right? So the first one is introducing us, lab 5 was introducing us to collision settings and mass and weight and things that we saw already. Then we've created our first thing that sort of changes into something else, right? That sort of has like a death to it, right? Which is the bomb or the stationary mine. So when you run into it, it disappears, it explodes. And we'll use that for the homing missile, and then from there we'll keep building. So other concepts that we're going to be introduced to hopefully today is going to be the navigational mesh and modifiers. And if we finish with the homing missile today, we'll start talking lab 6, which is how to set up different types of navigation inside the game. And navigation means what you think it is. Navigation is how do you navigate an environment, or how do you move from one location to another. So the movement of other objects in the game, besides ourselves. Things that can be controlled either as AI controllers, or later what we would end up calling AI characters. So let me just push play, and we'll move here first, right? So this is what we saw with the stationary mines, right? I think one of them I've set up to where it doesn't explode if I touch it, but if I pop it, it pops with the projectile. And I think this one, no, the projectile does work with that. So let's push play again, and I think this one will also work if we run into it. Okay, so I've set up multiple different mines with different conditions with that one. And with this one, which is the one we're going to be working on today, so we'll do a recap of that one. We'll look at what we did with that, and then we'll come to the missile. And you can see how this one is a stationary mine, but it's got a different shape. Can see it.
Still on the canvas.
Yeah, we're still on the canvas screen.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So, back to what I was showing you guys. Let me hit escape and push play again. Thank you for that. And so this is what we had originally, which were the 2 mines. This one, I think, doesn't explode or not. So it has different conditions, right? Different collision settings, sort of like what we did back there with the different collision settings. So we actually have 2 different kind of mines, right? So maybe this one right here only explodes when ammunition hits it, and not when, like, other objects run into it. So like that. And this one will explode when we run in. So same weapon, right? Same enemy character, but does have different conditions strictly from making the changes to the collision settings. And then this one right here is the homing missile. And if I walk up to it, you can see that it only attacked when I got on the platform, and that I've also got this thing respawning. So it comes back and then does the same thing again, but it will only attack me. Let me walk over here so you guys can see it respawn. But notice I can get this close to it and it's not doing anything. But as soon as I get on the platform, that's when it runs, or that's when it moves towards me. So those will be the things that we'll be looking at today, is how to set up the movement, how to set up different conditions for the movement, how to make something that looks like, because I actually made that from just a bunch of basic shapes, and then how to set up those conditions for that. So let's go ahead and start. So let's go ahead and look at the homing missile first, just so that we can see what we were doing with this. So remember, we've created a folder called A_enemies, and we put the A underscore, so it's always the top folder at the very beginning. We don't have to go looking for it. This is the one that we made, or I think the red one, no, the white one was the one that we made in class together. The red one was the one that I had used to make sure that I could demo and that it was working in 4.6, that I didn't run across any weirdness or something that had changed in the version software. So if we double click on it, what that'll do is, remember that this is a blueprint. We got this from right clicking, going to blueprint class, picking down here, no, I'm sorry, it was pawn, and then that gave us the pawn. So from there, we double clicked into it. First we have the viewport. The viewport is the shape, the mesh that's going to be used for this object, right? And the way we got that was by going into add, let's say cube, and that put a cube on the floor for us. From there, we went into event graph, and basically what we did was with the cube, well, we had to get rid of these guys first, and then with the cube selected, right click, went into made sure that it was selected, right clicked on the screen, and when that happened we got these two options. We went into collision, and then we said when the beginning of the overlap happens, that's when we want this effect to take place. And then from there we created the code for it, and I'm not just going to do it here, we'll just open up the older one and we'll see. So that was the overlap event with the cube, and then from there we dragged out from the execute of that, which is the white tag up there at the white triangle up at the top, pulled out, and we typed in sequence so that we could find this bubble right here, which is a flow bubble. You can see that this is an event bubble because it's red. This one has a different color. These have different colors, so the colors will tell you things on the bubbles, and all the red ones are events. Ones that are gray and white like this is how information, you know, first do this, then do this, or do this, or do this, or there's going to be a funny one later called a flip-flop that we'll use for doors. So first do this, then do this, but flip-flop between the two actions so that we get an opening and a closing of a door. From there, this one in particular gave us nodes and pins that we could say first do this, then do this. So from there we pulled up one, we said spawn actor from, and then we went into class, told it to be an explosion. Then then the game needs to know, well, where do you want the explosion to happen? We pulled out of the spawn transform. Remember, transform is the XYZ rotational information for it. So we pulled, dragged out. We said get world transform, or get world information about where that is, and we want it to be where the cube was. So wherever the cube was, this is where we want the explosion sprite, animation, actor to happen. From there, we turned the actor into a variable by pulling off of the return value and saying create variable, so sort of like going like that, and then see that where it says promote to variable. So then we gave that variable a unique name by coming here. You can just click there or go up to the top and write the name of the variable up there. And from there, once we had the variable, there are other events that we can create for that variable, and then we can say on destroyed, and you can see that that one actually says view as opposed to the pluses. The pluses let us add that in. So we hit the plus, that created this event for us, and then from there we dragged out and we typed in destroy actor, and then the only other thing we needed to do was make sure that both the execute and what actor is going to be destroyed are there, and it knows because this is for that variable. And the reason why we did that is because the cube is the cube, and this is a separate actor. It's something different than the cube, right? And so because of that, we also need to make sure that it goes away when it gets blown up, or after it's finished doing the explosion sound, puff of smoke, and the little fire sprite that we see, or the fire particle system that we see. So all that needs to be destroyed, which is what we're doing here with the variable. From there, the sequence here was for, we clicked out of the one, again we clicked and dragged out, and we typed in destroy component. Now instead of actor, we typed in component, and the reason why we did component is because we come up here, what is this called? This is the components panel. These are the components of what makes this object, right? Or this blueprint on the screen. And so from there, what we did was we actually clicked and dragged out and attached that here, right? So I can just grab cube, drop it on the floor, and then attach it to the target. I don't need 2 cubes, so I'm going to right click on that one and hit delete. And then I grabbed any other pieces. I can't put the self in there because the self is not a component. The self is the whole thing. So I can just grab the pieces of the self and make sure that those go away. Now the reason we do this is because we don't want anything left over in the game that might create a blocking, right? That might block our character. So we don't see it. It's not a visual thing in the game anymore because it's been destroyed, but there's like a remnants of it still in, and that may still be creating a blocking volume. And then the other reason too is that, let's say you create a lot of these things, like lots of bombs, and they respawn, and then if all these pieces aren't destroyed, that the game then has to keep track of all these things, right? So it's also good for making sure that you're like clearing the memory of the game and all that other stuff to as a thing is no longer in the game, it is being gotten rid of, right? Like a very Italian mafioso way of saying things, gotten rid of. But there you go. So that's what we had with the exploding mine. Now from there, the other thing that we learned is that we have collision settings with this. So what we said here is basically we want when us, the character, the pawn in the game, runs into this thing, and when we overlap, that's when this event gets triggered, right? So this is why the bomb isn't exploding, or the stationary mine isn't exploding on its own when it's touching the ground, because we've told it only create or only do this when we run into you, right? So the way we did that was we had to go into the cube itself, the object, the component, the actual mesh, and then scroll down into its collision settings. And then what we did was we switched that to custom. We said both query and physics for collision enabled. This object is labeled as a world dynamic. Remember, this is just the team that it's playing for. It's self-identified as a world dynamic. And then from there, all the other types of identification inside the game that are already there, because we started working with a template, right, with a first-person template. And so the ones that we have is world static, world dynamic, which is what this guy's playing for. And then you have pawn, which is us, the first-person character. Then you have another thing called physics body, vehicle, destructible, and then finally projectile, which is what our little Nerf balls are that we're shooting at the thing, right? So there you see that we have 3 options: ignore, overlap, and block. If you block, that will create what is called a hit event, right? Because if something hits it, they don't necessarily share the same space. They've just touched, their surfaces have touched, and then that would create the idea of what a hit is. What we're saying is when they overlap. So if they are occupying the same space, we want this event to happen. So we have overlap and block. Block will create a hit event. Overlap will create an overlap event. And because we've written the code for overlap event, that is what we're going to change. So by default, it would have always been, or it should have been here. And what we're doing is, going into pawn and then going into projectile and clicking those as overlap. Once those things are done, because we've made changes, we always want to hit compile and save. And then from there, at this point, we should be able to push play and walk up to the object, and in this case, either shoot it, which did create the explosion sprite, or walk into it, which now creates that. If I wanted to change that effect to where it was before, right, where I had the projectile causing the explosion but not me walking into it causing the explosion, then I would double click back on the object, go back to the mesh in this case, and go back to its collision settings and saying block the pawn, right? Don't allow for a overlap event and only the projectile. So if I do that, I click save, and now this object should not react to me, right? See, I'm not causing it to explode. I can jump on this thing and try to try to get it to go, but it's not until I we got a twofer there. It's not until the projectile hits it that we actually cause the explosion. So there we go. So that was last class. So now what we're going to do is we're going to introduce the idea of the homing missile, right? So the only real difference with the homing missile is that it's going to move as opposed to this one, which is stationary. So there's quite a few extra things that we need to do for that to make it move. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start a new missile, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we don't actually have to write a bunch of that code all over again, right? We've already got the explosion code. So what we could literally do is just make a copy of the code that's in here and apply it to the enemy, the homing missile. Sorry, brain fart. Need to drink more coffee. Okay. Yeah, that'll get me like another 15 minutes. Okay, so to create our new homing missile, I've already got a platform for it. Let's just go and find the material that I use for that. Put it on there. Yay, now it looks like the other ones. All right. So same thing like these platforms. I just made it a little bit longer so then that way it would have like a runway so that we can see it actually move as opposed to it just hitting us really quickly. Excuse me. And let's get rid of this thing too for now. Alright, so let's go back. Content, AI underscore enemies. And this is where we're putting all our enemy characters, right? So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to blueprint class. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make another pawn. And this time we're going to call it, instead of S-mine, which stood for stationary mine, this time we're going to call it H-missile for homing missile, right? So H-missile. And I already have one, and I think I misspelled that. Sorry, the screen's far away and I can't see. Missile. And we're going to do an underscore 2, so then that way I know that it's not the other one that I've created, right? I want to make a distinction between this one and that one. Y'all will just call it underscore 1. So we've created it. We get our little pawn thing. It's got the little asterisk there. I'm going to do a control save to get rid of the asterisk, so then that way it's saved in this folder now. You could alternatively go up there and you can see that we've made some new things. So we're going to do save and make sure that all that stuff gets saved. Fantastic. All right, so now that we've got it, we're going to open it up, and very much like the stationary mine, we get that little bubble in the middle. That little bubble tells us where the center of the object is, and from there what we need to do is we need to start adding static meshes to make this thing look like a missile. So first thing we're going to do is go to add component in the components panel. We're going to go we're going to go grab, let's say, a cube. And obviously this doesn't look very missile-y. But remember that once you have the static mesh out there, you can go to static mesh in the details panel and change it to whatever you want. So here you could look for something that looks more tube-like. I happen to have a lot of pipe objects and things that came from one of my packs. So a pipe is...
Wait, where did you get that? I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
So I've selected the cube. I've gotten cube. This is my first shape, right? Mesh. And then details panel. Scroll down to static mesh, right? And then there you can go to the little arrow. And then that gives you access to any other static mesh that you have that you've loaded into this project, right? So I can see all the tree stuff, I can see the grass stuff, all the meshes that I've imported. So I'm going to search, I'm going to hit browse, and you could probably type in, what would that be, cylinder? And you can find things that are shaped in cylinders. There should also be just a cylinder shape, which is what we made the tunnel out of, right? So let's just use that one. Now when that one comes in, obviously it's facing up, which I guess if you have a missile that goes into the air, that'd be great. But this one's going to go along the ground and try to hit us because we're on the ground. So I'm going to rotate its shape. So I'm just going to go to the rotate tool, and we'll make it go 90 degrees in that direction. And then again, in the details panel, same details panel for that cylinder, we're going to go to scale, and I don't want to change the X and the Y because that'll change the thickness of it. What I want to do is change the Z axis, and to make sure that you can move that one independent of the other two, you want to unlock it. See how there's a little lock back there? So you make sure that's in the unlock, and let's make this thing 3. Let's make this thing 10. 10 units. Okay. Now, the important thing here is you can see where that little bubble is, right? Remember that little bubble is the center of mass or gravity for this object, and this object is going to be propelled from this point. So I could put that back in the middle, right? So you can see now that the ball is somewhere in the middle. So the gravity for this, when it pivots, it's going to pivot at that point, right? So you can either have it rear wheel drive or front wheel drive, right? But decide where you want that pivot point to be, because later that's going to make a determination on how when the object moves towards you, and it's later when I show you how to get it to rotate so it can follow you. So there's like a degree of rotation in the thing, so instead of it just looking like it's the missile's moving sideways at you, it'll look like it's actually following you, like it's turning on an axis. So definitely not in the middle. You don't want it to look like the missile's turning from the middle, so either on the front end or on the back end. Either way is fine. You'll get the same kind of effect. I think on the front end it'll look like it turns sharper. On the back end it'll look like it takes longer to turn, like a semi-truck or something, right? Anyways, so just, position the tube, the cylinder, wherever you want that feeling, that change to be. All right, so now we have the body of the tube, right, of our missile. It's now we need to create more shapes, right? So the other thing we'll need to do is we'll need to go back up to add component. We'll add, let's say, another cube. I want to make sure that these things are coming in more or less lined up with each other. So let's just move that down. Let's select the cube. And remember, you can slow your camera down so that you can see things. I feel that's pretty good. Good enough for our example. Anyways, so remember that this now, I need a set of fins, right? Stabilizers, things like that. So I'm going to put that into the tube, more or less where I want the stabilizers to show up. And we're going to change this shape into a cone. So again, with the square selected, I'm going to go into Details Panel, Static Mesh, click here, and then type in the word cone, because we do have a cone. And so once I've selected that shape, you'll see it turns into a cone. It's pointing in the wrong direction, so we'll just rotate it 90 degrees. And now we got our cone in the middle. From here, I want to pull the cone out. So first I want to flatten the cone, and then I want to pull the cone out. So just so that you guys can see what I'm doing, let's pull that up. And flattening the cone will be, if we're looking at it here, it's the X because we've changed rotation, right? So the scale is undone, and we'll just flatten the cone. Right, so now we got a very, very flattish kind of cone. And then from there I'm going to pull the Y out, so we have something that more or less looks like a fin. So I'm going to push that back in, and then we're just going to make sure that it's more or less even. And if we wanted bigger fins, we could pull that out. If we wanted tighter fins, we could pull that in. If we wanted thicker fins, whatever you want. I'm not giving you guys numbers. I'm just saying, look at how we're changing shapes and making something new with it, right? All right, so that fin is in place. So I just need a copy of that one, literally, and to change its rotation, right? So I'm going to go back here, right click, duplicate, Control W. We have our second fin. I'm going to go change its rotation. And we'll rotate this guy 90 degrees in that direction. So now we got our rear stabilizer fins. We already have rear ones. Most of the time, for most missiles, it's probably good enough. Like if you got like a mortar shell or something like that. If you want a fancier missile, you can make another set of fins. So I'm literally just going to grab both of these again. Shift, Control W to make a copy. I guess it's going to be 3 and 4. And let's do the move tool. Oh, okay. So this is one of those weird situations where if you try to move both of them at the same time, it doesn't really work out well. Like it pulls them in different directions for whatever reason. So let's go to 3 individually, pull that one. See, I think I tried to pull it forward and it went way over there. 3. There we go. And I'll grab 4. I just got, and we'll grab that one, drag it forward. And then we do our little aligning job, make sure. I mean, it's a missile, it's going to be moving fast. As long as it's got those, you're probably okay. You could change, obviously, the shape of the ones in the front so that they're maybe slightly smaller. So let's see the Y on this one. So let's make that, let's say a 2. And on this one, it's probably also going to be the Y. It looks like the green one. So we're going to go back to that one and make that one also a 2. So now we got bigger rear stabilizers, smaller front stabilizers. All we need is our cone, right? So let's go add component. We don't have cone, but we'll create another square box. We'll put that square box at the front. With the square box selected, details panel, cone, or cube, and again we'll type in cone. Oops, too many letters. We have our cone. We need to flip the rotation so it's facing the front of the missile, or the homing missile, and then just bring it into alignment with the rest. And again, it's moving pretty fast, so I guess if I wanted to, I could... Oh, you know why? It's probably because it's inside a little bit. There we go. Because the diameter should have been exactly the same, because it's 1 by 1, and the cube was 1 by 1. So, yay! So now we got our missile. Let's say we want that to point out a little bit more. We'll make it pointier. Okay. So, missile looks pretty good. Let's make it look a little bit better. And the other thing I'm going to do is, just for fun, I'm going to name these things, right? So we'll go in here, we'll go rename, and we'll call this MH body. We'll call this fin 1. Oops. Fin 1. Fin 2. Fin 3. Fin 4. And we'll call this cone. I could have called it warhead or whatever, but descriptive, right? Now, from here, to make it look better, we're gonna change its colors. So I'm gonna grab the first object, go to, you'll see just underneath where we were with static mesh, there's materials. We could click there and literally grab any of the materials that are there. That one will make it a yellow missile. And all these materials are coming from packs which I've loaded into. That looks very distracting. There's got to be something that looks more metallic, like it's got. Also, not good. Let's see if we can find something that... Okay, that looks like pretty cool material, bomb mesh, and just randomly go through your meshes, see if you can find one that makes it look like it's supposed to. So now that I have, if I still have the body selected, remember that anytime you have a material, there's that little magnifying glass that's there. Oh, you guys can't see that. Let me get rid of my cat. There's that little magnifying glass that's there, right? And you click on that little magnifying glass, and what that'll do is in your content browser, it'll show you where that material is. And so now I can click on other objects and just drag that. Well, I have to drag it here into materials, and I can just keep filling in all the other little pieces. Now maybe I want, I like maybe I want the head of the missile to look or have a slightly different color, and have the fins have a slightly different color. So maybe we'll just go look for something else. Maybe that red color. I like that red color.
Got a tip.
Yeah. So material, static mesh. Where's that red? Let's go to this one. Let's go find it. There's the red. And now I should just be able to drag it. Makes it feel dangerous, right? Red is like a stop, caution kind of deal.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. And there we go. So the last bit of this is to create the fire, the flame that comes out of the back. So again, we're going to go back to the components panel. We're actually going to type in here particle system, and there's actually a few. It's actually right there. We don't even have to type it in, particle system. And once the particle system is in there, now it's kind of weird. What it did was it dropped it into a folder. This thing is basically a hierarchy of this is in that, that's part of this. So right now basically that particle system is attached to one of the fins, which I don't really want. So I'm just going to grab that and I'm going to drop it into there, and it's going to say either attach or make the root. I definitely do not want it to be the root. I want the root to stay there, so I just want to attach it. And you see now that it's put it even with everything else, right? So nothing is inside anything else, or nothing else is attached to anything else. It's just there as even. It's on the root directory of the scene root. So the scene's root. So there we have the particle system. Just like our static mesh, we can come over here where particle. So we're going to click on the particle system in the components panel. That's going to open up the details panel for it. And then we can scroll down. It's variable, transform, socket, particle. Right there we have template. We're going to click in the none, and you have whatever particle systems you've downloaded, right? So if you've downloaded a couple of packs, you will have some interesting maybe fire particle systems or other types. What I'm actually looking for is this one right here. That one says tutorial particle. Let's see what that one does. Aha! So we have something that sorta is giving me the particle system that I want, where it's like, it's not quite fire. Actually, that looks more like smoke. Yeah, that's not really what. Let's go with this one. So that one has a fire particle system, right? We have more like flames, and it does have a bit of smoke coming out of the top of it. Obviously, it looks more or less like the particle system is on fire now, as opposed to actually being the backside of the missile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. That'll make it look like it's coming out of the back. And then from there we just line it up. So let's go like that. And let's see. Just want to make sure that it's more or less in the middle. Feels pretty good. And if you wanted to, you could always go to scale, and you could lock the scale and make it a bigger fire. So that's probably too big, right? You can see it going over the edges there. So let's tape that back just a little bit. Let's go 1.5. That seems to have put it more or less where we need it. And I'll unlock it again, and I'm just going to elongate this. Now, if you do it too much, you'll probably you'll probably stretch out the particle system too much. But let's just give it a bit more of a stretch this way, and we get a little bit longer. Now you do have to watch when you stretch it, because then that pushes the start point further back. So we'll just pull it back up to the front so it looks more or less like it's coming out of the right place. All right, so once we've done all that, we now have the static mesh for our missile, right? So let's hit compile for that. And that has now compile and save. So we've saved that work. From here, we're going to go not to the construction strip, but to the last one, which is called the event graph. And the event graph, we are actually going to delete those things. And we have then an empty blueprint. Now, remember I said we were going to copy some of the stuff from the stationary mine so we don't have to build it again, right? So I'm going to click back over to my stationary mine. And this is the code that we have, right? And we just talked about that at the beginning of class, so we should all be familiar with it. I'm going to copy it, so I'm going to grab the whole thing. I'm going to do a Control-C to copy. I'm going to go into the H missile, and I'm going to do a Control-V. Now, there's going to be a couple of things, obviously, that we're going to want to change, because this is based off of the other cube, not the one that we have here. And this variable is based off of the explosion sprite here, and we're going to have to give it a unique name. So first things first, we're going to, let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go to the event. I'm going to delete that. So basically I'm deleting all the events and all the variables. So now we have just the base code, which is turn into the explosion sprite, and we'll probably have to delete these guys, which again were for the original stationary mine. So we basically have this as our base code. This is what we were able to copy over. That's not going to be a problem because these are universal between the two. All right, so from here, the last thing that we didn't actually add to the homing missile, and one thing that I like to do to it is I do like to put what's called a collision capsule around it. Remember that us as a first-person character, we actually have a collision capsule around us as well. You can see this little sort of what looks like a yellow pill bubble around us right here. And if I was to go back to my first-person character, you'd see that clearly. If I went into blueprints, went here, and went to viewport, that is our capsule component. It's what's giving us collision settings so that way this is what interacts with the world as opposed to the camera, the static mesh, this, or any of the other components that we've created. This is also kind of cool. Since we just actually made something like this, right? We just made a missile in the other one. You can actually look at these pieces and go, okay, there's some interesting stuff there, right? And you can start maybe identifying meshes and collision settings and things like that. So anyways, so we're going to go back to our missile. And from here, what we're going to do is we're going to add component, and we want a capsule component. So we can either scroll down a little bit, and you'll see box underneath collisions, box collision, capsule collision, sphere collision, right? So we want a capsule because that's the closest shape to what we have, right? This is obviously more capsule than it is a box or a sphere. So I'll put a capsule in there. Right now we don't really see much because it went over to where remember the root, that little white circle is, right? So there's our capsule. It's quite small. It's obviously not big enough to fit, so we're going to have to change the size of this and make it fit our missile. So with it selected, I obviously need to rotate it so that it's 90 degrees this way with our missile. And then from here, I should just be able to stretch out the capsule. And then once I have the capsule big enough, make sure that it's covering. Let's go here and let's make that. And I'm going to grab both the X and Y, so I expand those together. All right, so maybe it needs to be a little bit longer. And really, I'm most concerned with the front of it because this thing's going to be moving very fast. If the missile if this part of the missile touches you, and we're going to assign all the exploding and everything to the capsule, then the missile will hit you and not explode because we never triggered the explosion event because the capsule never touched you. So we want to make sure that the capsule is out in front of the cone enough that when this thing moves at you at high velocity, this thing actually has a chance to overlap with you prior to the thing or the missile hitting you. So a lot of this is speed versus timing to get the correct effect. But we move the cone. Let's move the capsule component. And so more or less, I like that kind of a configuration. A little bit of the capsule component in front, because this is going to be moving at us at high speed. So once that's there, we're going to go to the capsule. We're going to make sure capsule is selected, and we're going to go to its collision settings, and this is what we're going to set up the overlap events with. So capsule is selected, details panel, scroll down to the collision settings. We want to make sure that an overlap event is what triggers. Can the character step on this? Let's say no. Let's say this is something that the character can't step on. And all that lets us do is stand on top of it. From there we have a collision preset. So right now it's set to, by default, overlap all, right? We're going to go to custom. We're going to make sure that our collision enables are both set, right? So not only is it taking a query, like gathering information, but physics will also apply to this. From there, we'll leave it as a world dynamic where there's no reason to, that later I'll show you how to create a enemy object type or a different object type, so then that way you can actually create your own teams. But for right now, we're just going to leave it as a world dynamic. And because of how it came in, everything is in overlap, which is bad because that means that this thing's going to explode the second it touches anything, right? So we're actually going to go over to block. So I'm going to click the block up here, which is collision responses. And that basically, instead of me having to go and click, I can just click this one and it drops everything into that column, right? So the two things that I do want this thing to overlap with will be the pawn and the projectile, right? So I can either shoot it down or it's going to hit me and then explode, right? So that's how we're going to get those two events. The event overlap. That's what I should say. All right, so now that we've done that, let's save our work, compile and save. So now we have the mesh for our missile, or what our missile looks like. We have a capsule component, and that capsule component has collision settings that will only interact or only give us an event or an overlap event for pawn and for projectile. That's what we've got so far. So now we're going to go back to the event graph. This is the code that we copied over, that we cleaned up, that we can use. And now we're going to select the capsule, right, from the components list. We need to make sure that that is selected so that when we right-click into the blueprint, we get these options. Remember that if you don't have anything selected and you right-click over here, you don't have those options because it doesn't know what you're trying to it doesn't have an object to tie that event into, so it's not even going to give you that option. So capsule, right click, there's the two options that we didn't see before, and then we're going to go into the top one, collision, and there it is, on begin overlap. Now if we had assigned it as a block, then we would want on component hint, right? But we want this to be the second we overlap or we're occupying the same space as the missile, or in this case the capsule for the missile. So once that's there, we're just going to attach it just like we had with the original code. So that's beautiful. And then from there, the only thing that we need to know is what we're going to make the explosion come out of. So it's going to be, and this is why I like naming the stuff over here, because I can go, oh yeah, we'll just make it part of the body, right? The cone part of the missile. So wherever the cone part of the missile is, and actually that should be it right there. That's the cone. The cone part of the missile, that's where the explosion will take place. All right. So I'm going to grab cone, drop it in here, and then zoom in, and that's what I'm going to assign. So what we're saying is convert the cone, wherever the cone is, into the explosion sprite. And that's the same. Remember, we just went in there and typed in explosion and looked for the explosion sprite. So that stayed the same. Now from there, we do need to turn this sprite into a variable, give it a unique variable name, and then from there destroy the variable, just like we did with the stationary mine. So I'm going to click off of the return value, promote to variable, which is something, remember, all a variable is something that can be changed. So once the variable is there, I have it selected. I have a details panel for that. See how I get a details panel when I select that? And from there, I'm going to say that this is H missile. Oh, there's tiny letters again. H missile. And in this case, for me, it's going to be _1. Because I already have another missile that explodes, and I don't want to have two variables that have the same name. So this is going to be H missile _2 expo for explode. All right, so once I've got that variable name, if I select the variable, if I scroll down on the details panel, there's the events, and the second to the last event is on destroyed. So we're going to click the plus button. That is going to add a new event, and that event is called onDestroyed, and it knows what variable to go to. See how it says H missile to expo, which is the same one from down here. Now remember that this comes in as an actor. You can see that it says destroy actor, and so that's what we're going to type in is destroy. If I could spell destroy actor. Now, sometimes it adds the execute, sometimes it doesn't. Just make sure that both your execute and your variable reference are both tied into the new box, the destroy actor. Now from there, remember that with the stationary mine, we had to get rid of all the little pieces that came with it, so then that way we wouldn't have something left over in the game that might be creating issues for us. So we're going to have to literally drag each one of these pieces in. Particle system and the capsule. So all of those, right? Now, when you bring them in, doesn't look very nice and organized. So I'm going to select all of them, right click on one of them, and then halfway down that box you get alignment settings for the bubbles. So I'm going to say left align. So now they're all nice and neat on that sign. And then I'm going to right click on them again, go to align, and then you have distribute horizontally or distribute vertically. So that'll then take care of the spacing. So now they're evenly spaced bubbles, which looks nicer. So I'm going to select all of those, drag them over a little bit this way because we have quite a few more of those than we did before. And now I just need to attach them. So I'm just going to click, left click and drag, left click, drag, left click, drag, left click, drag, drag, left click, drag. So all of those guys will now go away. So basically we are exactly where we were. Oh, yeah, that's the cone. Okay, not the cube. So basically we have exactly the same code that we did with the stationary mine. On overlap with the capsule, do two things: turn into a sprite, then destroy the sprite. Make sure that that sprite shows up in the same place where the cone was. And this is important because the thing's going to be moving, so you want the explosion sprite to be where the cone is. And then we grabbed all the component pieces, which is the second pin, and we added that to a destroy component. And then we made sure that all those were destroyed. Now, with the homing missile, what I want to introduce is a new thing, which is a respawn. And that respawn would happen here. Because once the missile's destroyed, you could put the respawn maybe in the level blueprint. You could say, check for this, make sure that when this is destroyed, then add another one, and then you'd have to put a location for where it was going to be respawned. Or you can just do it here, because as soon as this thing blows up, then we're going to put a delay on it. So we're going to create a delay function, and then we're going to just like we did up here to spawn the explosion, do another one of these. So really the respawn is the same thing as this. This thing's actually called spawn actor, right? And what is our homing missile is also can be called in as an actor because it's a pawn. So the pawn is actually in the actor class. So to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to add another pin because we need a new thing to happen, right? So we're saying first do this, then do this, then do this. And we're going to click and drag out. I'm going to move it down here so I have some empty space. And I'm going to type in the word delay. Now there are a couple of delays, so make sure that the delay that you're getting is the function delays. You'll see that there's a little F on there. And then from there that it's underneath flow control. So we're going to hit delay. Now by default that delay comes in with these numbers in duration are always added by seconds. So so right now this would be 2/10 of a second, which is too fast for the respawn for me. So I'm going to go into here and I'm actually going to type in the number 5. So 5. So now it's going to wait 5 seconds before it respawns, right? So we've added the delay, and notice that this delay is after everything, right? So it's going to first do this, then destroy, then wait 5 seconds, and then respawn. So out of the complete of the delay, out of that execute pin, we're going to type in spawn, oh, I can't spell, spawn actor from class, which is the exact same thing we did earlier, right? Spawn actor from class. From there, we can go into the class setting, right? So that little downward arrow that's in the purple setting underneath class, and we can actually type in H missile. And you'll see that I actually have a couple of things here because these two are tied into the first missile, and this is the one that's tied into the second missile, right? So this one being second missile, I want to make another one of the second missile, right? So I'm going to select H missile 2, and it's going to need to know where I want this thing to start, right? Where, just like we did with this, where is this going to show up? So there we have the spawn transform. Now, before we tied it into an object, right? So we said get the transform information, the X, Y, and Z axis for location for this object, and that's where we want the explosion to take place. In this case, we want it to go back to the original location of where the missile was, right? Where it started off with. Because the assumption here would be that if it's a missile that's launching, it comes from a launcher, and that launcher could probably shoot another missile at you, right? So wherever the location of that launcher is what I want to shoot another missile from, or wherever the original location of the original missile was. So to get that information, and before we do that, I actually want to show you that you can hover right over this. It's doing an autosave. So we can hover over this, and if I right click on it, I actually get an options box. I can promote this thing to a variable, or I can split the structure pin, right? So this is, I guess, called a structure pin, and we're going to split it. When we split it, we actually get a lot more information, right? Before it was like up here, right? We see spawn transform, and down here we actually get location, rotation, scale. So we're getting the transform controls, but that we can type in the information ourselves, right? So what we need to do is find out where in the game that missile is going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize the box that we're working in, move that out of the way. I actually need to place one of the missile that's going to be spawned, so I need to go find H missile 2. There it is. Let me go ahead and save it to get rid of that asterisk. Okay. So now I'm going to grab it and put it out on the floor, right? So once it's out on the floor, it does have a location, right? Now it has, if I go into the transform information for it under its details panel, we can see that we have an X, Y, and Z axis for where it is. So before I move on, before I grab that information, I just want to make sure that the missile is actually off the floor, and because that would make sense, right? It wouldn't make sense for the missile to be touching the ground. So we're going to put it just a little bit above, and that's going to change our z-axis just a little bit, but this is what we want now, right? So it's more or less in the middle of, well, I could put it be a little bit more in the middle. Okay, so it's more or less in the middle of the area that I want it to affect. It's quite big. We could actually probably go to scale, and let's drop this down to, let's say, 0.75. And that changed a whole bunch of stuff, so let's not do that. Let's just drop that back to 1 and leave our missile alone. And that's happening because each one of these pieces are independent. We haven't merged all the pieces together. I'll show you how to do that maybe later. Right now, let's just get this thing to shoot at us. So we have the missile. It's out on the floor. We've got it in the position that we want. And now with the missile selected, I'm going to go into its details panel, go down to the transform, and if you hover just between the word location and the X, you have to obviously have a little bit of space there. So if you've done this, it's going to be more difficult. If you do that, you'll get it. So we're going to right click, and you'll see that we get a special dialog box that says either copy or paste, right? So I'm going to hit copy, and that's going to copy the X, the Y, and the Z information for me and keep it in keep it on the clipboard. So now I'm going to go back to I'm going to open up my HMissile-2 so I can go back to the blueprint, which I think is chilling down there. And this is where we were, right? We were trying to respawn this. So I'm going to go to the spawn transform location where I have the X, Y, and the Z, and I'm going to try to right click, and no, we don't really get the copy information, right? So we can't really paste or copy and paste like we did earlier on the other thing. So we're actually going to have to put the information individually in each one of these boxes. So both in the X, the Y, and the Z. The only crazy thing is that right now if we do that, if I hit paste, I get the X, the Y, and the Z because I copied all three, right? So now it's just a matter of going in there. I usually hit the back arrow key, and then I just start hitting delete. So we'll delete that. If you have decimal points with information there, then you definitely want to leave that decimal information points there, because otherwise it'll move the missile slightly when it respawns. It'll respawn in a slightly different location. Because I have my snapping turned on in the world, everything is coming in on zeros. And that should be the default setting. Everything should be coming in on zeros, unless you've changed that, and I'll show you where that is. But we have that. The only thing I want to do, and you have to be very careful, because there is a positive X coordinate and a negative X coordinate. This one happens to be a negative X coordinate, so I want to make sure that that negative is there, right? So now it says X negative 4,238.0. I'm going to click into the next one over, and that information now stays. Now we need to do the Y one, so we'll do Control V to paste, and we'll do the same thing all the way for Y. This one actually happens to be a positive Y, so then we'll leave that, hit enter, and then I'm going to go to the Z-axis, go Control V to paste. This is the, whoops, what happened there? Right click, paste. Oh, stop doing that. Paste. I'll just use my arrow keys instead of trying to click on it. There we go. And we'll get rid of the parentheses, everything up until that. This one happens to be a positive number, so I don't have a negative in front of it. And now I have the location for where it's going to respawn. So, what did we do? When we overlap, do three things. First thing is turn into an explosion sprite initially. Make sure that that object is then deleted, and make sure that that explosion sprite happens where the cone happens to be. From there, the second pin will make sure that any of the components that were left over that maybe didn't explode do get destroyed. And then the third pin, which we just added, we created a delay, right? We typed in 5 in there. So remember, this is denoted by seconds. So if you wanted a whole minute, you'd have to type in 60 there. Or if you wanted 2 minutes, it'd be 120, and so on. And we just want 5 seconds, so we're just typing in the number 5. And then off of the complete, we are spawning another actor, just like we did up here, but this time instead of it being an explosion, we're actually calling in a whole nother H missile, right? So we're respawning the H missile. And from there, we should be able to hit compile and save. And at the moment, the missile's not going to move because we haven't done the movement part of it yet, but we should get the respawning effect. So I should be able to walk up to this thing, shoot it, and in 5 seconds we should get the respawning. So it sure did explode. We'll wait 5 seconds, and it did pop back in. I want to check my other collision setting, right? So we just shot it with a projectile, so that obviously worked. Let me run into it. That obviously works now. So we've checked the two conditions that we want, and it respawned again. So we can shoot, wait 5 seconds, and you can test all the different conditions that you were trying to do with the missile. So now what we need to do is we need to get it to move, right? So there's actually going to be a couple of ways that we can get this thing to move. I'm going to hit escape, jump out, and go back into editing mode. And so there are a couple of things that we need to do to get this thing to move. So the first thing is we are going to create what is called an AI controller. Now, this will be the only enemy character that we use an AI controller, because it'll be the only enemy character after this that will not be a pawn. Everything else will be a character. So this will be the only time we see the AI controller, but it's a neat little function. So to get the AI controller, again, we're going to go into A_enemies. So we're making sure that it stays with our enemy folder. I'm going to right click there, and I'm going to go up to Blueprint Class. And what we're looking for is actually not here. So we're going to type in AI, and you'll see that we get an option there that says underneath controllers, AI controller. That's actually what I want. So I'm going to select that object, and then I'm going to hit the select button down here, because you can try clicking enter and all that, and it's not going to select it, so you have to hit select. And then we're going to need to give this thing a name, right? So easiest thing to do is name it what it's going to be controlling, right? So I'm going to call this H missile underscore AI, and I already have one called AI because I created one earlier. So this one I'm going to call AI2. So that way it's a slightly different name and the system doesn't get confused. So when we do that, we sort of get what looks like a circle on top of a cone. And the way to the way to conceptualize that icon is to think of like this is the brain of the object, right? So if the static mesh, if the pawn that we created is the body, this is the brain. This is going to tell it how to move. So we've got that AI. I'm going to do a control or a control S to save, or again you can just do save all. Make sure that all that information is saved and that you have no asterisks before we continue. So once we do that, we want to double click and open it. There is not going to be anything in the viewport. There's no object that we need to tie this into, right? At least not here. It's going to be going to the other mesh, but definitely we want to leave this blank. So don't add anything to your viewport. What we do want to do is go to the event graph, right? So I've clicked from viewport over the construction script. Now I'm in the event graph, right? So we do have two options that are here. One is event begin play, and the other one is event tick. Now, we are going to actually make this feel like a tick. I don't want to actually use ticks because ticks are very expensive for processors. And the reason why is because it's an even smaller measure of time. What we're going to do is we're going to set this thing up to constantly check once a second to see if the condition has been met, or to then create an event to move the missile towards us, right? So we don't want to use an event tick because that'll just be very expensive. So we're actually going to set up our own timer. So I'm going to actually select tick, and I'm just going to delete it. We can get that bubble back if we want it. So we're going to go to the event begin play, and we're going to click out of there, and we're going to type in set, I think it's set timer by function name, right? So that's the option that we want. The function that we want is called set timer by function name. Now, from here, you can see that we have a timer, we have an overlap, and we'll discuss this in a minute. But before we move on with this, because we need the next piece to fill this part out, right? So now I need a function, right? I need something that that this thing is going to be doing once it gets the condition right. So what we need to do now is create a custom event. So all the events that we've used up until this point have been ones that are presets, one that come with the game, right? So event overlap, event hit, the event destroy for the variable, for the explosion sprite. So everything has been made for us. This will be the first time we actually make our own event. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to type in custom, and there you see it already. Add custom event. So that's what we want. And you'll notice that it's an event just like the one up there, but it comes in with a blank generic name, right? So when we have that one selected, when we have this bubble selected, we can actually go in there and name it. So we're going to right click and rename, and we're going to call this follow player. And literally it can be anything. You can write in missile launch. You can call it whatever. What's important is that we get the exact same name here. Whatever this thing is called, this thing needs to be the same name. No additional spaces, no extra space at the end, no extra underscore, because it's going to be looking for that name as a function. And if that function name is not the same, it will never tie this timer into this event, right? So the easiest thing to do is select this, go up to the name, Control A, Control C. So Control A to select all, Control C to copy. And then I'm going to go into function name, and then I'm going to hit the Control V to paste. And I'm not going to add a space. See how I added a space by hitting my space bar? That would throw this off. So I want to make sure that I don't have any spaces at the end, and that I don't have any spaces at the beginning. So once that's there, I'm going to literally click off, so then that way I don't add any extra information to the backside. So it is very important to make sure that this stays exactly the same as that. So once we've got this, let's actually finish up with the event, and then we'll set the particular variables for it, right? So from here, what we need to do is get a way for it to follow us, right? So we're going to click out, and we're going to type in AI move to. Okay, so we'll see that that is actually part of an AI. So it's a simple order for an AI controller, right? What are we? What did we just set up? An AI controller, right? So this option will only show up if you're inside of an AI controller. So once so it's underneath tasks, and it says AI move to. Okay, now the pawn is going to be get controlled pawn. So get control. So I think we already have it. There it is. Get. I think it's there. It is. Sorry, it's just underneath. Sorry, it's too far away. So get controlled pawn. So since we're setting up an AI, this AI, we're going to go back to the mesh, and we're actually going to tell it to listen to this AI. Because it's listening to this AI, and it's a pawn, it would be a controlled pawn. So you can have multiple missiles that are listening to this one AI that are on the floor, right? So you can keep using this AI move to the move to tool for all of them, right? So we only really need to set up one. I'm doing two because I'm showing you guys how to do it. So for pawn, we need get controlled pawn. For actor, so this is what's going to move. The target actor is what we're moving to, right? So what we want to do here is we want to get player character. All right? So the pawn, the controlled pawn, is what's going to move. The get player character is what it's moving to, right? Now, the other important thing is by default, this thing comes in as a 0. See how it says player index 0. Now, the reason why that's super important is because if we go back to our first person character and we go to our first person character self, and I believe it's scroll all the way down. Let's see, where is our character? Yeah, we're in first person. Pretty sure it's self. Actor. There it is. I think it's that. No. Anyways, we as an individual, as a person in the game, are labeled as player 0. So that's what I'm actually looking for here. Maybe it's somewhere on one of the other pieces. And I'm pretty sure it would be on the self. It would make more sense for it to be self so that we would be labeled as that thing. It may be hidden in one of the menus, but we should be... I thought it was all the way at the bottom. There we go. So auto receive input, so player 0. So you have player 0. So if you were playing a 2-player game, the first player would be player 0, the second player would be player 1. Because 0 in computing is a number, right? So we are labeled as player 0, and that's what we want to make sure that the AI, the player index, actually why don't we just type that in, player index. There we go. No, that's finger index. Am I on the right thing? Anyways, we could probably go through this until we found the right thing. But anyways, so you have a player index. Your player index is 0. And because of that, sorry, I'm like now hung up on trying to find out where that thing is. But anyways, so we are player 0. And we want to make sure that the homing missile comes to player 0. You could just make it target player 1 or target player 2, right? So you could actually come in there and make it target some other character or whatever would be player indexed. But we're going to leave it on 0, which is the default, which is what it comes in with. Okay, so to recap what we have so far, we left the event begin play. What that means is as soon as the game starts, it's going to be checking for this condition, right? So there's a timer that's going to be looking for this event, right, which is going to allow this event to happen. And the timer is going to be checking once per second. So we're going to go in there and we're going to type in 1. And remember that the event tick would have actually have taken this and broken it down into, like, let's say 500 units. So every second there would be 500 times that it would be checking to see if this condition was met. Here we only need to check once a second. That's going to take a lot less processing power for the computer to do. And the other thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that it keeps checking, right? We don't just want the game to start, it checks once, then the first second, and then never checks again, right? So we want looping on so that at the end of the second it checks again. At the end of the second it checks again. At the end of another second it checks again, right? So every second it's constantly checking to see whether it can move the AI, right? So let's see. So that explains function, the where we got this, why we would want to set this to 1 second, and you can change that number. You can make it 0.5, which would be every half a second. You can make it 2 seconds. You can make it every 10 seconds. But it's going to change we want this to react fast, so I'm going to leave it at 1. And then it's constantly checking. And then down here, there's our custom event, which we called follow player. We added the AI move to function. Then we said any pawn that is being controlled by this AI controller is what's going to move. And then this is what it's moving to. And the only other thing that I might change here is what's called the acceptance radius, right? So what that means is once the movement has started, once we know what's moving and where it's moving to, we need to know when the task is over. when has it actually gotten to the other player? When can this object stop moving? And that's what the acceptance radius is. What it's saying there is within 5 units of the character, as long as we get to 5 units within the character, we then could say that we've completed our task and it would stop moving. If I wanted this thing to stop moving prior to it hitting me, remember that our character is 50 units wide by 200 units tall by 200 units long because of the gun. And so we're 200 by 50. So if we left that acceptance radius at 300, the missile would move to us and stop almost like 100 units away from us, right? Because it would have said, I've reached my task. I can stop moving, right? With 5 units, it gets us so close that its bubble and our bubble would touch and overlap. And because we're getting that overlap, we then get the explosion effect from the missile, right? So acceptance radius is 5. And then we do not want to say stop on overlap. Because if we say stop on overlap, remember the way that we're using this AI controller is we're going to control maybe multiple missiles. And definitely when the thing respawns, we want it to move again. That new one needs to move again. If we say stop on overlap, then the AI will stop moving. And it'll stop moving all the AIs, anything that's being controlled by this controller. So we actually don't want it to stop. Otherwise, the next missile that comes in won't move, right? So we're going to say compile and save. And now what we need to go do is go back to our H missile, and we want to go back to the root directory of that H missile. So I'm going into the components panel, and I'm going to I'm going to click on H missile and the thing that's underscored as self, right? Under self, if we go into the details panel, we can see pawn, use controller pitch, use controller yaw, use controller roll, auto possess player, right? So there we see player 1, so we can see who would automatically auto possess, not what we want. Auto possessing AI. Right now it just says placed in the world. So if it's there at the beginning of the game, it would move. If it gets respawned with this option, it would not move because it's not placed in the game. It's respawning. It's coming back in afterwards. The game has already started. So what we want to do is select the bottom option, which says both when it's placed in the world and when the object is respawned. We want to make sure that whatever AI controller is controlling this, that it repossesses it, right? And then from there we have AI controller class. Right now, by default, it's set up to a generic AI controller. But if we click on that, we'll see that we have in my case, the 2 controllers that I've created, AI1 and AI2. So we're going to assign this to AI2, right? So H missile AI2. So now, every time, what we're saying is every time this thing is spawned or when it was there initially in the world, it's going to be automatically taken over and listen to AI controller class. And which one? The H missile AI, right? The one we just finished creating that we have all the rules for. All right, so once we've done that, we're going to hit compile and save. And we're almost there. It seems like we've done a lot, but we've got quite a few steps that it's not going to make this thing work. All right, so if I push play now and I go walk up, and actually both of the missiles should not be working at the moment. All right, so neither one of them moved towards me. All right, why? The reason why is because we have not defined an area that these missiles can move in, right? So there is what we call a navigational volume, which is volume just means X, Y, and Z, that we can put out on the floor that will allow things to move in that area. So not outside that area, but inside that area, right? So if we go to volumes and we go and we scroll down far enough, we'll see, navigational mesh bounds volume. So bounds meaning that it's what's inside of it. It's a boundary. So navigational mesh boundary volume. I'm going to grab that and put it out on the floor. Now, When we put that out, it just comes in looking like an invisible box. And right now, the bottom of mine is green, but yours should actually come in looking like this, right? So it'll just look like this little box. What I want to do is I want to see how I have like a bottom triangle down there on the volume. I want to make sure that that goes into the floor, so then that way the volume is actually overlapping the surface, right? Now, to get that little green that we were seeing earlier, if you come up here to, I believe there should be an option up here called View. So let me select on that again. Show. So that's the option that I'm looking for. So we've done perspective now when we were setting up tubes. We've seen lit when we were working with lighting and we were maybe in a dark area, right? And we needed to see things differently. So we could go to lit. That is also where our wireframe mode was again. The next one over is show. So we can actually just turn certain things off that we don't want to see right now, right? We don't want to see this, we don't want to see that. So what I want to see right now, by default, navigation is actually turned off. You can see that there's a shortcut there, which is the letter P. So if I hit the letter P, well, I can't do it right now because I'm in this one. Oh, did I hit the wrong keyboard? No. So I hit the letter P, or there, to show, and you'll see now that I get that little green. Now that little green is only going to be there if I'm interacting with a surface, right? Because otherwise, it's not going to show me what's a navigable area. That's such a hard word for me to say. Navigable area. Anyways, I'll keep trying. So now you see that when I overlap it, it goes green, right? If it's up in the air and not touching, that's how you know what is actually an area that can be moved on. Now, obviously that area is too small, right? So I need to widen the area, so then that way it'll actually cover up the area that we want the missiles to work inside of. So with the navigational mesh selected, I'm going to go into its details panel, and we should, just like a brush setting, get an X, Y, and Z, and we can go ahead and start pulling that out, and let's say pulling this guy out. Now that's obviously too big, so let's make that a little bit smaller. That went the wrong way. Let's go back to 900. And let's make the bottom box. Oh no, that was 200, so we're probably here. Let's go 25. Yeah, let's make it a little bit long. Let's go 3,000. Yeah, let's go 3,200. There we go. So now I've got an area, and I'm actually going to move this one over here since this is the one we're working on, right? So now we have defined a space for this thing to move in, right? We have a navigational mesh. That navigational mesh is in. We can see that the object that we want to move on the mesh is interacting with it because there's like a shadow of it underneath. And if these two things were not overlapping, you could see that I wouldn't get that little shadow. There's a dark shadow there, but there's not like a break in the green. See how there's a break in the green there? And I can see the floor underneath it? That means this object, the missile, is inside this navigational mesh. Excuse me for just a second. I'm going to drink a cup of coffee. Drink some coffee. Oh. Take my headphones off. Sorry, sometimes I got so much stuff on my head right now. I've got I wear glasses, and then I have a wireless mic which goes over the ears. That's like a headset wireless mic. And what happens is every once in a while it just puts pressure on my temples, and it's like if somebody was just sitting there squeezing your temples. And after a while I start getting a little bit of a headache from it. It's weird, so I need to take everything off for like maybe a minute and do that. In fact, why don't I do this? Let's just take a quick break. I need to run off to the bathroom anyways, and that'll give me enough time to have all this stuff off my head and sort of reset my temples, and so I don't have the pressure on them. So let's say 5 minutes at 1:30. We'll come back and we'll finish talking about the navigational mesh, and that should give me enough time to sort of freshen up. So let's do
good.
that. 5 minutes, and at 1:30 we'll come back, and I'll give everybody a chance to go get some water or go to the bathroom or something. Be right back.
I'm cool with that.
Couldn't get the I couldn't get the fire to look right yet.
How about now? No?
Huh?
I just trying to adjust my mic volume because it became sound from the background.
Mm.
Yeah. So that you can hear me now with the mic adjusted. Yeah, I think you can still hear me.
Yeah.
One that is noise canceling.
Okay, 1-2 back. Yeah, feel a lot better. And I can drink more liquids now too. Yay. Alright, so back to our missile. Okay, so what we did is right before the break was we set up the navigation mesh. We basically just put it on the floor. We made sure that it was overlapping with the floor. We hit the letter P on our keyboard so then that way we could actually view it. and we can see what it's interacting with, right? What surfaces it's interacting with, and we've made that the way it is. Now, from there we checked it, right? We walked up to the missiles, and we're inside, obviously, the navigation mesh. We can't see it because to the player it would be invisible, right? But as an editor we can see it. So we should be able to get this thing to move towards us, but it's still quite not there. So the last piece of this puzzle is that we need to create within the pawn the ability to be able to move, right? So just like we did with everything else, we had to add that stuff in. So we're going to add this in also as a component as well. So what I'm going to do is, and there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can either select the missile that's out on the floor. When it's selected, you could go up to Details panel. You'll see that there is Edit Blueprint there on the side. That's one way. You can say Open Blueprint Editor, and that'll take us right back to where we were, right? So we see the addition of the spawn that we put in earlier. Now, to get motion, this is actually a component, right? So it's something that we're adding to as a piece to our character, to our homing missile. So we're going to go to Add Component, and if we scroll down far enough, we'll see Movement as one of the headers, or there it is, Movement. So you have Floating Pawn Movement, Inert to Movement, Projectile Movement, which is actually what our enemy character, what our projectiles are using. That's sort of like using gravity, where they sort of like create this arc. That's the arc right there. And you can kind of see it in their icon, right? It kind of looks like a little ball with an arc. And then the last one is rotating movement, which we will actually use for a rotating turret. So later when I show you how to make an enemy character that can shoot back, right, we'll make two, one that runs after you and shoots, and then another one which stays still and has like a little, like a turret that would turn around, and sort of like on a battleship, right? The guns on a battleship, they're in one location, but they can rotate on that location, and they can go up or down and then shoot. So that'll be for the rotating movement. But for us, we actually want to make the object look like it's floating across the screen, right? So we're going to click on Floating Pawn Movement. And once we've added that, you'll see that we get Floating Pawn Movement in our Components panel, and that once it's there, we get a Details panel for that, and we can actually make some changes to this. So right now, we're actually not going to make any changes. We just want to see what the default looks like when it comes in, and check to make sure that everything's working, right? So let's hit Compile and Save. And let's close this box real quick, and let's see if now we have everything that we need to make this missile work. There it is. It moved. Yay. Now the other one's not moving because what? It's not in a navigational mesh.
It.
Huh? I'll do it again.
Missed it.
Right? So you see how slow it was.
No, I didn't see it.
You didn't see it? What are you guys doing?
Oh, okay, I see it now.
Right? Okay, I'll just...
Is it moving downwards?
Yes, it is. That's what I was going to mention, right? Was that we are getting a weird movement. Remember, we're on default. We haven't made any changes to the movement. So what it did was it moved down towards us. Remember what I told you? Remember that little scene route, that little circle? I'm going to jump off because that's getting a little distracting. But remember that little scene, that little bubble that we saw when we were making the mesh for the missile? Here, I'll just go and click on it. Let me hit escape. Let me go to the missile itself, and let's go back to the viewport. So there's a couple of ways that you can fix this. This guy back here, the default scene route, which is why I didn't want you to delete or remove that. I want that to actually be there. That is where it's basing its movement from. This is where its 0 is, right? So this is why, because that ball is in the middle of this thing, that this thing goes into the middle of the floor and then moves across, right? So there's actually something that, so we could actually put this bubble lower, and then that way this thing would fly above the ground. But I don't want to do that because I want to restrict there is actually a better way of doing this, because you may end up using this mesh for something else, for another missile somewhere else. You call it something else, and now the scene route is off axis of where you want the thing to turn, right? So leave this there. What we're going to do is we're going to click on floating pawn movement in the components panel. That then opens the details panel for the movement. And the first thing that I'm going to actually do is I'm going to change the max speed, because that thing was moving really slow, right? So let's make it work. If 1200 was what we saw, 2400 would be half, would be, twice as fast, and 5000 would be 4 times as fast, right? So let's make it 5000. And since we've made, and this is what I like to do, I like to make one change and then go see what happened, right? I don't want to make multiple changes and then go see what happens, because then I don't know what's making the change, or whether the combination of those two changes is creating an effect that I don't want, right? So I'm going to make the max speed change first. I'm going to hit compile because I made a change, and then I'm going to hit save. So always compile and save. So we're going to minimize that. I'm going to push play in the game, and this thing, as soon as I walk in, should move 4 times faster towards me. Boom! Right? That was more like a missile. That thing we saw earlier was like a lazy missile. This thing. Yeah. Well, I mean, you could.
Without the bullet time effect.
Well, you could add that later, right? That's a particle system. If you could find some kind of bullet particle, matrix bullet particle system, or get good enough and learn how to make them.
It'll just show the momentum.
Well, right. Well, the idea there being that you're slowing down time, so you're actually seeing pressure waves, which you wouldn't see in real time because it's too fast for us to see it. So that moves better. Okay. Now, the other thing that's kind of annoying is that downward movement that it does, right? So that downward movement, again, we're going to select the missile. We could go to edit blueprint up there, or we can click on it down here. Either way gets us to where we want to go. So we're going to go to, again, floating pawn movement, and we're going to go look at some of the other options that we have. Let's see, is it there? No, let's see, where am I looking for? There we go, planar movement. So remember that planar means a plane. So we're taking our X, Y, and Z and saying it's either the X, the Y, and Z, and we can actually see that down there, right? And one of the cool things is that it says constrain to a plane, meaning that you can say move on the X and Y, but don't move on the Z. And that's what's happening, right? We're getting a forward movement, but we're also getting a forward movement down. And it feels weird because we're seeing the downward jag and then it comes straight at us, right? So we're going to say constrain to plane, and then we're going to click on custom, and we're going to say constrain it to the Z axis, right? So basically what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that it can't move down, it can only move X or Y. So we've made a change, we're going to hit compile, we're going to hit save. So we'll close that box, we'll push play, and this time we should get a missile that moves straight towards us that doesn't go down. Nice. Let's do that again. Let's move somewhere else over here. We're still getting a little weird movement, right? Like it still has like a little jaggedy kind of a movement, but it is moving at least in one direction towards us. Now, if we wanted to, we could probably constrain like, let's see what direction this thing's moving at. So if I'm looking at the X, Y, and Z, we've just constrained the Z axis, which is the blue one. The Y axis is moving it left or right. So if you wanted to stop the jitteriness of it and you only wanted it to move in one direction, the X axis, like towards you, now that could be dangerous because if you walk to the side of the unit, then it would just move forward. So, you know, at some point, you know, I think the other thing we could also do is, and it's a little bit beyond where we want to be right now, but is make it to where this thing has like a pitch and a yaw, and that way it looks more like the missile is, you guys have all seen missiles launching on movies and things like that, right? Where when the missile first takes off, there's like a little bit of a wiggle, but as soon as it gets speed, it's going straight out. But that wiggle doesn't look like it looks like it's coming from the backside, right? Because that's where the engine is. And then the stabilizers are trying to hold it. But anyways, we're not trying to go for super realistic. All we really wanted to do was get something to move and come towards us and make it more or less move at the speed that we would anticipate with that object. And we have been able to do that. So we go there, and not only that, but we've been able to get it to respawn. And notice where the puff of smoke is. The puff of smoke is right where the cone. We could change that. We could make it look like it was towards the back end or like in the middle, because we could assign that to something else. So we're getting a pretty good movement. Now, so real quick, what we'll do is we'll go back to here. And I just want to recap this because this is actually the end of Lab 5. So if we look at Lab 5 and we look at the links that we have, the first one was Introduction to Collision Settings, Part 1, Movability. God, words today. Movability and physics. I think I need more coffee. So that was when we took the cubes, put them out on the floor, right? We assigned gravity to them. We gave them different weights. We made them move slightly different, right? So some of them moved slower and gravity affected them differently, right? And we saw where all that stuff was in we know that it can only be done to a static mesh. We know that that static mesh has physics and collision settings, and the physics is where we got all the different movability things, right? Then we did Lab 5B, which was the second half of collision settings, right? And then this one, we were actually talking about the collision settings themselves, right? So there it would be if we have an object selected. Let's grab just a regular object. Let's grab one of these guys. And we go, there's the collision settings, and we saw that there are two things that we can generate, two things that become events, right? So one's a hit, one's an overlap. The other thing that we saw that we could do is either the character could step up or not on it. We saw that there are what are called collision presets, right? So different things that came in because we picked first person shooter, and that those are arbitrary presets, like everything's blocked, everything's overlapped, everything's ignored, or different things that we might expect that particular object to do. From there, we saw that there is a thing called collision enabled, which means that it's either going to register the event but not do anything physically, or it's going to physically do something to the object but not register an event. In most cases, we want both the information of the fact that that thing hit or they touched and the thing that's going to happen to physics, right? Whatever physics we've assigned to that object. So vice versa, depending on what you need, you're going to either select query, yes, don't do anything, or either query, or either physics, or query and physics. And then from there, we found out that we have object types, and that those object types are what team this object is playing for. And what that means is it's identifying as a world static in this case. In this case, we realize that those are just words, right? It just says like Cleveland Browns or the Oakland Raiders or whatever, right? These are just the teams that they're playing for. It doesn't mean anything about the
You mean
object.
the Vegas Raiders? They moved to Las Vegas.
Oh, did they? Okay. Well, I'm the
Yeah.
old school. That tells you how much I keep up with sports.
Okay.
But I'll probably now not have to use that as an example. The only one I remember is the Oilers when they moved to Tennessee and they became the Tennessee Titans. And then we got the Texans, which is fine. So object types. So these are the teams they're playing for, and we found out that they do one of three things. Either they're going to ignore the other object, somebody playing for the other team. We can see the other teams down here. We can see world dynamic, world static should be here. There it is, world static. And that we have the three objects. Either it's going to ignore the object completely, no physics, no query, no nothing. It's like the object ghosts each other. The overlap, which does allow for query and physics to happen, and will also trigger a overlap event, right? And then block, which means that the object's surfaces touch, but they can't overlap, they can't occupy the same space, and that when these would actually trigger our hit events, right? And so, and that's where we got as far as that, right? So that was our collision settings. So back over here. So with that information, with knowing how to move objects and what their physics are and how to get collisions to work, we were able to start our first enemy characters. The first one was the most basic of all of them, which was the stationary mine, which took advantage of collision settings and made sure that it didn't blow up when it was just touching the floor, that it would only blow up when our projectile or us as a pawn would walk over it. Then we also saw our first blueprint, right? We started building our first blueprint, which if we go back into here, and not to belabor this point, but you know, we more or less know what that whole thing is doing. But we basically set up conditions. We basically said, when this happens, we want two things. We want an explosion sprite to come in, then we need to get rid of it because Martin said so. Then we want to know where it's going to be and what object it's going to take. And then from there, we made sure that any object that was associated with the original cube got destroyed. From there, we used that information to build the base explosion for our missiles. We actually saw how we could build something like a more complex mesh out of the pieces that we had available to us inside the homing missile, right? So there we just kept adding more meshes, and because of that we were able to create a really cool looking missile even with a particle system and smoke. We saw how we could change the colors on those particle systems, and then the other thing obviously is we set up that capsule collision around it. From there, each one of these became the pieces of the missile, and the capsule then is going to be what triggers the event, right? So that's where we went into the collision settings and made sure that we had query and physics turned on. We knew what team it was going to be playing for, and that the only two things that would make it explode would be the pawn and the projectile. And then from there, we have pretty much the same code from the other one as far as how to make it explode. We obviously had to put more things here because we have more components to get rid of. And then the only other thing that we added was the delay with the respawning, which is actually the same thing that we used up here, but instead of spawning an explosion, we spawned a whole new actor, a whole new version of the same thing. We gave it a delay of 5 seconds, and that's how we're getting that effect. From there, we continue with the homing missile, right? And that homing missile, we learn how to put in a navigational mesh, how to put the object into the navigational mesh, make sure that the navigational mesh in itself are interacting with each other, and then we had to go back to the missile and tell it how to move. So first of all, we had to tell it where it could move, and then we had to tell it how to move. So the how to move was in the missile with the adding of the floating pawn movement, and the where to move was done by adding the navigational mesh and extending it over the area that we wanted the movement to take place in. So that finishes lab 5. Then you have the walkthrough. So let's just look over the checklist of the things that I want. So project A, set up 5 platforms. There should be text in the background on those platforms indicating the mobility and the physics of the object that's there. In the case of the cubes, I want the gravity and the force. And in the case of the other boxes, I want there it is in B5. So by the end of lab 5, all we have is gravity and force. So the text on the back of that object should look like that. And just to give you an idea, with what I mean by that is you see how I've done that for these, right? So there is ability, mobility, fit. Well, this should just be gravity and force, and I think I just copied over from what I needed in the other ones. So if we leave that up and then go back to this side, we can see that what Martin wants on that wall is what is the setting for mobility, what is the setting for physics, what is the collision setting, what object type is it labeled as, and then what are the object type responses. So if I go back to the image, what is the mobility? What physics does it have? What is its collision presets? Query and physics should probably always be turned on. What object type is it? What team does it play for? And then how is it ignoring, blocking, or overlapping things labeled as world static, pawn, and then the last thing down there that I forgot was the projectile, right? So, and those are the three things. Either how is it going to deal with us when we walk into it? How is it dealing with other things in the world that are also labeled by default world static? And then how is it dealing with the projectile? And then just set up 5 conditions, right? So we have the original one, which is the force and gravity. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 variations of static meshes that we've gone in and we've changed physics and collision settings, so then that way we get different effects on those. So we go back here, that's lab 5B. Then we go into lab 5C, and that was the exploding mine. So you have to create an exploding mine, and then you have to show it being hit by a projectile, and then you have to show it you running into it. So I want to make sure that it both explodes when you shoot at it and when you walk over it. And then the homing missile was you need to show me the navigation area, right? So you show me where the green area is on the navigational mesh. Show me that the H missile actually moves when you walk onto the navigational mesh. And then show me that the missile explodes and that it, and I don't really have on there that it respawns, but you can add respawns to that. Add respawning to that. And then list the changes in the text board behind them, right? So basically go, see, that's why I've left a board up here. So up there you would write homing missile, mobility would be movable. It would definitely be a movable object. And then from there, collision settings, what team it's playing for. So it's a world static, and very much the same information. And actually all I do is I just copy and paste this stuff. I just grab this, copy and paste it, run it over to the other wall, paste it over there, and then just make, go into the text boxes and make the changes that I need. That way I don't have to like write 100 things. All I'm going in there is going in and making whatever changes I want. So once you have one of these things made, just copy and paste it, copy and paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, and then go into each one of the boxes, text box, click on the A for the text box. Everybody should know how to do this. We did this in lab 1 where we wrote our name on the wall. And then you just type in, pawn is going to ignore this one. So that one's, well, I obviously cannot spell. And let's say we'll go to this one, and on this one is going to block, right? Anything labeled a pawn. And so then that should then be reflected in the boxes that are in front. So just copy paste and then just move across, go into the text box and tell me what the difference between the one before, or what these mesh boxes are doing on this platform. And then do the same thing for the bomb, right? For the stationary mine, right up there, stationary mine, and then what the settings are for it. And the reason why I'm doing this is I'm reinforcing collision settings, all these different things that we're looking at. If you have to keep, it's like writing on the blackboard, right? The teacher, when you got in trouble, not that we're in trouble, but when you got in trouble, you go up to the board and I will not X, Y, and Z. I will not X, Y, and Z. I will not X, Y, and Z. Why? Because the repetition got it stuck. So if you keep writing that stuff on the wall, plus then as I see it in the visual, you don't have to open up everything. I can just look at the back wall and see, oh, that object was supposed to do this. Is it actually doing that? Yes or no? Okay. And then that would get you through the end of lab 5, right? So when you create your video to turn in for this project, remember to look through this list, make sure that all these things are in your video when you turn it in. And then from there, let's go back to home and lab 5. And here's my little walkthrough video of the same thing, right? So you click there, it'll open up the YouTube page, and then you can watch my version of what I'm looking for in your walkthrough. So exactly what I just talked about in a video right there that you can watch on your own later, and make sure that you have all the stuff that you need before you make your walkthrough. All right, so let's go back home, and we have about an hour's worth of class left, which is fantastic. Let's go into navigational meshes, right? Because there should be a bunch of questions that should just automatically start popping up among us, like, well, what if I want to set up zones? What if I want some characters to move on this area, but I don't want other characters to move in other areas? How big can I make a navigational mesh? Is there limits to the
Yeah, so
navigational
Professor,
mesh? Yep.
yeah, I was just wondering about the video. Is it segmented?
What do you mean cemented?
No, segmented.
Which video?
As in the video that was at the turn in.
The video that you're going to turn in, okay, just let me do something like this. Let me actually just play this video. Okay, and hello, this is the video walkthrough for lab number 5. So, see how it's 5 minutes in length? Remember yours needs, well, mine's a little bit longer, yours needs to be under 5 minutes. In this project, we set up our first enemies, and we start, well, actually, we are, yeah, it's the first 2 enemies. So that's going to be the homing missile and the mine, the stationary mine. And we also set up these 5 platforms with different types of collision settings, physics settings, and movability settings. So let's go ahead and walk through everything. So in 5, basically what I want to do is I want to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 platforms. Each one of those platforms has 3 set of boxes on there. So that is pretty much 5A. And the other thing that was also part of 5A was making these boxes right here. So let's go ahead and push play. And we'll see that these are movable boxes enabled with physics. The first one is 100 pounds. The purple one down there is 500 kilograms. I should say kilograms. And the one up at the top is the concrete. The concrete one also has angular and linear physics turned on, so I should be able to shoot the bottom one out, and we'll see that this one moves slower. You can see that the physics is changing on there, where if I hit the white one, it moves pretty hard, and the purple one takes quite a bit of hits before it sits and does that. Okay, so that is all of 5A with the information written on the backboard for 5A. So 5B was to sit there and create 4 unique situations for the static meshes using the movability physics collision settings. So what I've got here are movable boxes that have the physics enabled. They're custom. They will they do have physics and query turned on. Their vehicle, their object type is vehicle, and it has a static block and a pawn ignore. So remember that the bullets or the projectiles and myself are pawns, so we are being ignored by this. So we can walk right through that. Now the ones here, these are static. That's why they didn't fall when physics is also disabled, so that's why they're in midair. They are set to block all, so they should block my projectiles, and they should also block me as a pawn, so I should be able to walk into them, and them being this way will allow me to be able to stand on them, right? Okay, these fell right through the floor because these are world static ignore. The platform and the floor are world statics, and so none of the other stuff really matters except for the fact that it is movable and physics are turned on. So because of that, they did fall through the floor. These right here are movable, they're physics enabled, their collision settings are disabled, and they're set to overlap. So we are not blocking them, which means we can't create any physics. So we're getting something very similar in nature to this one right here, where we were able to walk right through, but for different reasons. Okay. So that is, oh no, 5 is also going to be the missile, the bombs, the stationary bombs. So what I want you to do first is walk into one, show me that the explosion and everything happens. Let me walk into another one. There's the explosion. And now what I want to do is hit a couple with the projectiles and see that they do indeed go away. Now from here, this is going to be, at this point you would only have the first one set up, and with the first one set up we should at least be able to see it do that. I believe in this one I did give you the respawn code, So you should be able to do that with part of 5. So if I again walk off of the area or somewhere next to it, we can see that it's not reacting to me. The second I walk onto the platform, it does. From there, I personally forgot to write block and block there. I think I was doing some undos, and that's why those are missing. They are, however, on the other ones. So I'll go back and I'll fix those. But anyways, so up there we do see that this is an actor. It's or that the actor is a pawn with an AI zone 1. So that's the well, zone 1 because we're in zone 1. But it is a pawn actor. It's movable. It's been enabled. Physics collision is custom, so its query and physics are enabled, and we have world static, and this should be block and overlap for that. And then the same thing there. That should be block and overlap for those. So I need to go back and write those in. But anyways, that would be the checklist for number 5. Do make sure that everything is written. Don't do what I did, or go back and redo yours, or redo the video after you've made your corrections.
Okay. Do you see how that was? I opened up my project, I explained what I was going to show you, and then I started walking through the level, and I had my checklist so that I knew all the different things that Martin would be looking for in my video, and then I just made sure that I showed that in the video that I created. Does that make sense? Now that you've seen a video? That your video should look like this, and it should be under 5 minutes. It shouldn't take you that long to walk to each one of these stations, show me the information on the back panel, and then show me that the cubes or the static meshes that are in front do what they say they're supposed to do because you've written them on the panels in the back. So it should be that easy.
No props.
And I have videos and checklists for every single project, for Lab 2, Lab 3, Lab 4, and Lab 5, Lab 6, and all of them. So you should never know what to show me in your video. You should know exactly. And these are the things that I'm grading for, because these are the skills that I want to make sure that you can do. And this is sort of the only way that in a video online, in an online class, I can actually see these things in your project and that you don't forget anything. Because if you forget to show me something in the video, I'm going to assume you didn't do it. Maybe you did, but you didn't show me, so I can't grade you. So you have to, that's why I create the video, walkthrough demo video, so you can model yours after, and then I give you a checklist that tells you exactly what I'm looking for. Okay.
I just want to make sure, cause I just
Yeah, no problem. I mean,
I don't want to waste your time. By the time I want to present it, hasn't. Oh, okay, this video is lab 1, lab 2, lab 3,
Exactly.
lab 4, lab 5.
Correct. And that's exactly why. Yeah. And you're
I
gonna
just
make a
wanna
vid. You're
know
gonna make a
that
video
the
for each
video
one of
not
these.
not divided.
Each one of these is going to be its own video. So you're going to have a video for Lab 2, which is going to be under 5 minutes with its checklist.
Okay.
You'll have a video for Lab 3, has its checklist and its video walkthrough. So an example of what that lab should look like, and then the checklist of the stuff. Now, if you're on Lab 5 and you haven't created the video for Lab 2, that's fine. Just look at the checklist on the stuff that's in Lab 2 and then walk through it. So maybe you've got the exploding mine over there on a platform because you're in Lab 5. Just show me the stuff that's part of Lab 2 and make your video based on that. Because if you're on Lab 5, you should have already finished Lab 2 with all the stuff in it. And you're just building. We're building on top of the same level over and over and over again. So yeah, regardless of where you are, if you haven't made a video, just go back, look at the checklist and go, Martin wants me to show in this stuff, the window, the fact that I'm using packs, interior decorating, exterior, and I just take them by the little pond I created. And I don't have to show him the rest. And then I stop the video, save it, upload it, send Martin the link, and then Martin can watch the video for that. Because otherwise you start you get sidetracked in the video, because people will. They'll just start talking about this, or they'll start talking about that, and it'll never be concise, and it'll never be under 5 minutes, and it'll never be something that's gradable, because it'll just be a student rambling for 30 minutes about, oh, this is the stuff from lab 1, this is the stuff from lab 3. Oh, let me jump over here because we're in the lab 5 area now, and let me jump over here now, let me go back to lab 3 because I forgot to show you this. And it's all over the place. So this way I get concise videos, exactly what I'm looking for, and you stick to the script, which is the checklist. Now, I've given this a lot of thought. Trust me, turning in projects is sometimes a nightmare if people don't know, or you're not very concise on what you want from them. So this is exactly what I'm grading you on, then this is what it should look like when you're done with it.
I just want to make sure that I'm following the path here and not straight
Oh, yeah.
off.
No, perfectly okay to ask questions.
Yeah.
Let's see. Sorry. How did I do that?
Oh, you just selected my own.
View progress. And you must be the first person on the list because your name starts with an A. All right, so
Yeah.
let me go back to, what did I want to do? Oh, I wanted to collapse modules. I wanted to hit this button. All right, so there we are. So we've done a recap of what Lab 5 is and all the new skills that we learned with that. And now we're going to jump into Lab 5, and then we're going to jump into Lab 6. So very quickly, we're going to do an overview of what navigational meshes are and navigational mesh modifiers, because you can actually create you can modify the mesh. From there, we'll get a little bit more into zoning. So Lab B will be setting up navigational mesh zoning. C will finish the topic there as far as because it's actually a large topic and I don't like making 45-minute videos. So I think I broke those down into like less than 25 minutes each. And then we have what are called navigational invokers, and we'll talk about that in.
Nav meshes.
Excuse me.
I just calling it nav mesh. I'm just taking notes.
Oh, okay, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
So what a nav mesh is, different types of zoning, and then what is called a nav mesh invoker. So the invokers, if you have a small world, you can do what we did. Right, which we set up a mesh, we put the characters in it, and we got them to move around as far as the H missile is concerned. But if you have a big world, well, you can't have a huge navigational mesh. It'll start taking up a lot of processing power because the thing is constantly checking that entire area for that. So what a navigational invoker is it actually goes around the enemy character and sets up a zone around them for that. And then we'll break that down into two pieces because it again is also a long topic. And then from there, that'll be the end of Lab 6. So Lab 6 is really all about how and where and why do my characters or do my enemy characters, how am I getting motion and where can they move? Right? So first of all, defining an area of where they can move, and then how are they able to move across that area. So let's dive right in. Let's go back to here, and let's get back to the right keyboard. All right, so let's do the introduction into the navigational mesh zone, right? So the first thing is we obviously saw that we can put a navigational mesh into the area, right? So we see it there. We also saw that we could go into its details panel and obviously change the size of it, right? So its location and the size of it. Now, obviously we have two missiles here, right? And we want both of those missiles to be fired, right? We want, because right now if I push play, the one on the left moves, but the one on the right doesn't, because the one on the right doesn't have a navigational mesh boundary underneath it. So let's do the obvious thing, which is expand this mesh over into the other box, right? So I'm going to drop this in the middle, and then we'll make this wider, right? So let's see what happens. Let's push play, and let's walk into the first area. They both came after me, right? It should make sense why this is happening. Oh, that guy got a little confused, and I think it was probably the break in the floor here that might have gotten it stuck a little bit. But anyways, so this is obviously not an effect that we're looking for, right? If I just spread this across, what's going to end up happening is that any
any homing missile that is in this area will come and attack me. Now, the way that I've set up the game, right, is that I've got these little platforms there, and I'm by order of the way that I've designed it, you would assume that this would only be able to attack here, and this one would only be able to, the left one can only go down the left lane, and the right one should only be able to go down the right lane. They shouldn't be able to cross over, right? So, the other thing that we might think, right, we're like, okay, well, we have one mesh, right? Let's make two. Let's see if that makes a difference. So I'm going to go back to the original mesh, and I'm going to make it a little bit narrow and put it back over here so that it's just on the one side. And I'm just going to go back over, and logical thinking would say, well, I'll just go grab another mesh, put it on the floor, make it the same size as the other one, right? And they should, by theory, be different because I went and grabbed another one, just like when I grab a light or when I grab a basic mesh or a geometry. Why'd I put it on the floor and it's a new object, right? But not so with this. It is labeled as another mesh. You can see that it's up there as zone 2, but its information as far as is actually shared. It's weird. Watch. We'll do this real quick. I think this one was like 3200 that way. No, yeah, 3200 that way, and I think we did like maybe 500 this way, maybe a little wider. Let's put that so it's just on the platform, and let's make it a little bit wider. Okay, so by assumed logic, this is its own navigational mesh, and the other one is its own navigational mesh, and there shouldn't be any interaction. When I step on this one, this guy should hit me. When I step on this one should hit me. Let's see if that is what actually happens. So I'm going to walk into the first one. Both missiles came after me, right? Sort of what I was alluding to. Now, the other one couldn't get to me because it didn't have a direct path to where I was, right? Because when I look at it, I broke the path. There is no space, there is no connection between what's happening in this one and what's happening in that one. So they are separate, but it's sort of like the missile where we could have one AI controlling multiple things. Well, you only have one AI for the navigational mesh. Now, you can set up other ones, and that becomes its own difficult proposition. So the easier thing to do is to actually go into each one of these objects and define a zone for them, right? So we're saying only if the character walks within this area do we want this missile to act, right? Now, the other thing that I want to show you before we move on, and to do this, let me get rid of one of these, because really I don't like the idea of having multiple zones if I'm going to do it this way. So I'm going to select that zone, and I'm actually going to delete it from, just going to hit delete on my keyboard, and we're going to be back to the first zone, right? Now that effect that I just created where one of these things came after me but couldn't get to me, I can actually create that effect in a different way. I can have what's called a nav modifier volume, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to extend this back over so it's over the entire area. I think it's this one. Over the two platforms, right? And in between the two platforms, I'm actually going to create, or I'm going to drop this nav mesh modifier. Now notice what happens. It actually puts a break in the green, right? So that could be a quote unquote a safe zone, right? Maybe you're doing a zombie game and there's a closet that your character can go hide in that the zombies can't find them if they're in that closet. Well, if the zombies can only navigate on the area that's green, then if I put a nav mesh in, let's say, a closet or in a room, that room now becomes a safe zone because the enemy characters can't walk into that area. Sort of like that second missile couldn't hit us because it couldn't actually get to us, right? So this is creating a negative area in our mesh,
right? So the green is where you can move. This, the nav mesh modifier, is where you cannot move, where anything that is moving using this navigational mesh will not be, or cannot move into that area. So I'm just going to stretch that and drop it in between, stretch it out a bit more, and now we have, again, a separation between the two navigational meshes, and I can go all the way down and see that they are definitely not touching, so there's no way that the missile on this side could get over to the other side, right? So let me push play, and let's see if this happens. So what should happen now is they should both move towards me, but the one on the left should not be able to reach me. And notice that it's actually following me now. Right. Oh, I ran into the other one. Ha! But it can't touch me. And I think it's close enough that I'm probably going to bump into it if I try to get into the area in the middle. So I might make that a little bit bigger so that I can't overlap with the collision for the second one. But if I had enough space, I should theoretically be able to walk right through here, and it wouldn't be able to touch me. I'm closer to the one on the right, that's why that one hit. But notice that this one can't touch me. It's still moving towards me because I've already triggered the movement, right? Because I walked into that area. See, I'm inside the area. Even though I'm in the negative space, I'm still inside the green area, right? So it's kind of weird the way that works, right? So we can create a larger navigational mesh, and then in that mesh create spaces that are basically null and void, that you cannot walk, or that the enemy characters cannot walk over, right? Now, that's very cool, but it still doesn't solve our problem, which is I want Missile 1 to only work in the area for Missile 1, and I want Missile 2 to only work in the area for Missile 2. So in order to do this, we need to actually go into, let's go back to Missile 2 because that's the one we were working on just now. So we're going to select that, and we're going to go into its blueprint. So that's where we're editing that. So what we need to do is we need to create an if condition, right? We need to create a condition that says if our enemy character is overlapping and in the navigational mesh area, then out, and you can right click on that and say break link to, and then very specifically this one happens to be the sequence bubble, and so we'd say that. So you can actually, if these were all connected, you could disconnect them all at the same time, or you can very specifically say only disconnect this one. So from there, we'll just make sure that it's connected, and well, you could leave it or disconnect, it doesn't matter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag another line off, and I'm going to type in if. Now, what this is also called is called a branch condition, because it creates, it takes two branches and brings them together like a branch does, right? Where there's like a single branch and then it branches out. So we're going to click branch, and you'll see that it actually comes in. That's like a little wishbone icon, right? Like a little bone that you get off a chicken or a turkey, right? And then you have the branch. Now on there, you have true or false. So if these conditions are met and this is true, we want A to happen. And if these conditions are met or they're not met and the condition ends up becoming false, we want you to do B, right? So don't think of it as true or false. Think of it as option A or option B, right? So either the condition is true and this happens, or the condition is false and this happens, right? Now, you'll see that in the branch, we have something called a condition, right? And that condition, when it comes in, it's got a check mark in there. What that check mark is basically telling us is that it's making this a true statement. So we don't actually have anything plugged in, right? But from within the branch, we can say this is either true or false. If I do this, this is then the condition has not been met, in which case it becomes a false. We would get the false. So if we do this, we get a true. If we do this, we get a false. Right now, we don't have anything connecting to false because the missile's not going to do anything if the guy our main character doesn't walk into that area, right? So for us, this branch condition is always going to be a true. That's where we're going to get the action part out of it. And for the false, we're just going to leave it alone. Doesn't do anything, right? So how do we add the condition? So basically what we need to do is we need to figure out where our first person character is, right? Because that's what we're trying to find. So we're trying to find where our character is actually is right now at the moment, right? So to do this, we need to somewhere down here. I'm gonna create a new bubble, and we're gonna right click and type in get player character. And we've used this one before already, right? We used this in the AI move tool, right? When we created the AI for the homing missile, we needed to know what it was going to be moving to, and we already talked about that index 0 is us. That's the first person player. That's the player 1 in the game, or in computer speak, player 0. All right, from there, we need to get some information from this guy. So what we need to do is we need to get its world location. So this is saying, this is the player, this is what we want you to get, but now, what we want you to look at, but now we need to get its current location, right? So we're going to click out of here and we're going to type in get world, and you'll see that we do get an option for location, and in parentheses, we get what would be the different components that would be part of our individual character, right? So our first person character has a capsule component, it has a mesh, which are the arms, it has a secondary capsule component, then there's another, these are for rotation, and then those are for location, right? So we have the capsule component or the mesh, capsule component or the mesh for rotation or for location, right? And then we have the scale, which is the other part of the transform, right? So location, rotation, and scale is what transform is. And inside get player character, the two things that we could pull off of is either where the mesh is or the capsule component is. So I'm going to pick the capsule component because that's what we're using, the collision settings and all that. It's just the bigger object, right? So I'm going to use the bigger of the two options because the mesh would be just the arms. So we're just going to tuck that in. And I'm just going to move that in and tuck it in. So now what we're saying is we need to know where the player is, where the player is. We're going to be basing the X, Y, and Z off of the capsule of the first person player, and we're getting the transform information for it. Now, what we need to do is we need to find, and we need to define a range, right? So when I say define a range, if I go back to this, the range that we need to know is this area right here, right? So we need to know the X, Y, and Z area of this platform right there, because we only want this missile to interact when our character is inside this area. So let's go back to our missile. So what we need to do is we need to break the return value. So we could right click and do that, which would then give us a return value for the X, a return value for the Y, and a return value for the Z. So it's going to constantly be telling us where these positions are. Or we're going to define an area for this, sorry. From there, the get world would be telling us, would be changing that, and then this would be spitting that information out of these. So then what we need to do is we need to find a range, right? So we're going to right click in this area and we're going to type in range. And what we're looking for is a float. Now we do have an integer and then integer 64, and then we have random float, which is not what we're looking for. A random float would randomly generate numbers. We actually need to know where it is right now. So we're going to say in range float. And we'll see that we get a value, then a range. This is the value that it's going to be coming from there. And then if that value is within the minimum and the maximum of our range, we will get a return value of yes, right? Because remember, we need to plug this into our condition. And you can actually see that the return value is in red. And when you hover over it, it's labeled as a Boolean. A Boolean is basically the equivalent of a yes or no. It's a question. You're asking the question, and this is the return for that value. So we have where the character is, where the component is, or what character, what object inside that character we're going to be measuring, where the character is or where that object is right now currently in the world, and then a range that will then define whether any of the rest of this stuff happens, right? So we need actually two in-float ranges. So I'm just going to select the first one because we need one for the X, one for the Y. We don't need to do a Z because our character right now is not moving up or down. There is not a platform above us or a platform below us. We're on the same plane with the missile, right? It's on the same floor with us. So we don't need to define the Z. We can later if we want, but so I'm going to select this one. I'm just going to do Control W, I think gives us the duplicate. And now we have one that's going to be for the X and one that's going to be for the Y. So let's grab the X and put that in as the value and the value. All right. Now from there we need to define the range, right? So we need to go and figure out where these points are in the game. So to do this, we actually need to minimize this. And what I like to do is I actually like to go and grab a basic cylinder, and I'll put that out in the game. I'll just make it tall and skinny so that we don't get a very wide. And remember that the point that it's measuring is always the point in the center, right? So I'm just going to go to the edge of that box and more or less find the point, the top point or one of the points of the navigational mesh, right? So there it is right there. And remember what we did earlier where we went into the transform tool, we right clicked, and I just hit copy. Now from there I'm going to go back into my missile, and I have one of the two, right? So I have, from that one point, I have an X and I have a Y coordinate. So I'm going to go into the minimum range of this float, and I'm going to hit Control V. And remember, we're going to get X, Y, and Z. But since this is the one that's attached to the X, right, I want to get the X value out of this. So let's click there. And let's delete everything except for the X value. Remember, this one happens to have a negative in the front, so I want to leave that. Otherwise, I'd be on the other side of the board, or the other side of the level. So we have a minimum value as, for the X, of negative 4,287 in my case. In your case, it'll probably be different. So then I'm going to come over here to the Y value. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go into min meaning minimum value, and I'm going to hit, again, Control V to paste. And this time, because this one is connected to the Y, right, I only want to get the Y value from this. So, not the Z. I don't have any I don't have any points. It's not a negative, so it's a positive number. And there we go. So now I have the first two values, the X and the Y. Now from there, I need to go and find the other point, the other 2 points. And the other 2 points would be adjacent, right? Would be the adjacent corner. So what that means is the corner that's catty corner. It's the one on the other side. So if I was just to grab this and drag it down to this corner, well, my x-axis would be the same, right? If I just grabbed this one and dragged it over there, my y-axis would be the same. So if I moved it to this point, I can only collect a new x-axis. If I move it to this point, I can only collect a new y-axis. But if I move it to the adjacent corner, the one on the opposite side, I'm going to get two brand new x and y values, right? They are going to both be different. So let's just move it this way and then move it down here. So now I'm basically picking the x and y axis for the other side of the platform. So now that I have that new value, I can go here, right click, copy. So I have the new x and y value, and I'm going to go back to my missile. So we'll go back here. I'm going to click on maximum value, Control V. Again, all I need here is the X. So I can get rid of everything except for the x. The x also happens to be still a negative number, so I'm going to make sure that I leave that negative value there. Now we'll go back here and we'll do the same thing. Control V. We only need the y value. And there we go. So what we're saying now is if our character, player 1, its capsule is within this X, Y, and Z range, and if this is true, then we want the missile to explode. Obviously, it's going to move because the AI is controlling its movement, but once it reaches us, explode, destroy everything in the capsule, and then respawn 5 seconds later, right? So, if this is all true, now, the crazy thing is this, right? If we look at the branch only has one input. If I try to add this one to the branch, and then add this one as the condition to the branch, it's going to knock the other one out. So I need another bubble. I need, there are different things like and, or, nor, which meaning neither this one or the other one, right? So if I right click and I type in the word and, you'll see that underneath math, I get booleans, which remember this is what the red ones are. And there we have and NAND. So NAND returns the logic NAND for the two values, so neither and. There's neither or, neither and then there's just regular and. So we're going to just use regular and. Now regular and does have 2 pins, and that means I can attach the first pin here, and then I can attach the second value there, and then by default, as soon as I connect the return for that one, it'll disconnect the other one. So now we have an AND boolean, which is setting up the condition that this and this have to be true before that happens, right? So we could have the character walk into, and what that does is it closes off the box, right? So if it was just one set of coordinates, as soon as we walked across that value on the X, even if it wasn't in, it would just, basically you'd have it from end to end on the game, right? If you didn't close up the box. So because we've got X, 2 different values, Y, 2 different values, we're definitely saying box, and the AND is making sure that it's only inclusive for those things. So once we've got that there, we're going to return the value to this. And if we did a Z value, we would add another pin. So there's where our Z value would go, right? So right click, I'm just going to remove that pin because we don't need it. So that's where the add pin is on the AND. So you can have several AND statements, right? And the other obvious one for us on this one would be the Z axis. If we need it, if we're doing like a game in space where you have both X, Y, and Z, where the object could move across, then that would make sense to have that one there, and then add the pin for it. All right, so that should take care of that. So nothing, we didn't really change anything to the code that was there before. All we did was we added a branch condition. Let me move it this way so we can kind of see the flow of this. There we go. So that gives us a little better flow on how this ends up working. I'd probably stack that there just to compress it a little bit, make it smaller. All right, but there we go. So let's check. Let's see if this works. Let's hit compile, save. I still have my doubts, but let's see if it's going to work. And I don't need this guy anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that out. And let us actually get rid of this thing too, right? So I'm going to get rid of that modifier in the middle, so we only have one large area space, one navigational mesh. And as we have it set up right now, this one should only move if we walk into this part, right? And this one will move regardless of what platform we're in, right? Because we haven't gone in and defined the zone for this one. So let's see if this works. Let's push play. I'm going to walk into what would be zone 1. Oh, they both came and hit me. Oh, and that guy's not blown up yet. So that means something is wrong. All right, so and this is why I thought that we were going to have an issue with this. And I think a lot of this has to do with the minimum and the maximum values. They're actually flipped. So let's go back to our homing missile. And you see how the minimum value, let's see what let's see, inclusive, mid, inclusive. So all that does is make sure that they're there. It definitely still moved towards us, but it didn't define the true or the and. Okay, so do nothing. Yep, that should be right. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Sorry, I'm just looking back at my notes.
To each other.
Whoops. Yeah, I think it's that the values are backwards. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to replace these values. The top one will go, the maximum value will go into the min value will go into max. So what I'm going to actually do so that I don't lose these numbers is I'm going to make copies of these. Control W. And then that way I know what I wrote in and I can just copy and paste stuff. So first one's easy. Control C. Delete that number from there. Go into Control V. So now we've got the bottom number replaced. And then I'm going to go here. Control C. Go there. Control V. So now I've effectively just flipped them, right? So the smaller number is on top and the bigger number is on bottom. And then we're going to do the same thing for the bottom one. I'm going to grab the top one, Control C, drop it into the bottom one, Control V, grab the other number from over here, Control C, and flip and put the smaller one in there, Control V. So, and then these two I don't need because we were just using that for placeholders for our numbers. And let's do a compile and save. And let's go push play. Oh, and jump out of this and see if it works now. They are still flying at me. And apparently, I think, boy, we've got some stuff going on with that. It's not even exploding anymore. Let me just see if I can make it explode by not triggering the event. Yeah, so something happened there. So let's go over to this thing. Let's select it and let's see what may have changed. Go back to capsule. Capsule is querying physics. It's custom. Character cannot step. It is creating an overlap event. It should be overlapping with the pawn and the projectile. And it is labeled as a world dynamic. I think that the only thing that we changed was this. So whatever mistake we're having should be actually coming from the new stuff that we added. That was our capsule component. And unless the capsule's not following, let me see, drop it in there. That makes everything part of the capsule. And that messed up a whole bunch of stuff. I think it made it flip down and it made it a really big object. So let's do a Control Z to undo. Leave that guy there. And this is good. I mean, this is what would normally happen when you're trying to do something complex. Let's do a save all down here at the bottom. That is really weird that that thing is now not showing me my icon anymore.
Mine stopped exploding too.
Okay. So let's do something. I think what I did was this. This is the only thing that I did was different from my example. So instead of getting the return value for these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a thing called a break vector. So I'm actually going to right click on this and break link, right click on this and break link. Break all links because there's only one. And I'm going to right click on this and recombine the structure pin so it's one. And then what I think I did was a break vector. There it is. So I type in the word break and vector, and essentially did the same thing. It just has it as a separate box. Let's see if for whatever reason this gives us a better oh my god. I'm doing this in the wrong place. I'm totally doing this in the wrong place. So we're adding this to right now to the to our actual missile. This is actually really good. Let's just grab this right here, and we're going to copy and paste it into the AI, which is actually where it should have been. So I'm going to select all of that. I'm going to do a Control C. I'm going to go to H missile, and what we're actually doing should have been here, because it's actually, this is part of the moving function. So instead of actually it being in the missile itself, we're going to go to the missile's AI, and we're going to put that information here. So I'm actually, since we've already done it, I'm going to just go Control V to paste it. And all we have to do now is attach it. So we'll add that to the branch. And then we'll add that to the AI move too. That is going to make a big difference. So compile, save. And now I don't need this over here. So I'm just going to grab all of those, delete this guy, and then I need to reattach that. Okay, compile, save, missile, compile, save. So sorry about that. But yeah, all that work and it's very easy. It's actually good that that happened to us, because then we could see how we could easily fix that without having to rebuild everything all over again. So there was no variables in this. There was nothing that was unique to any of this code here. The only thing I obviously want to make sure is that it's actually still connected. And I believe that I don't even need this break vector. I could have probably have just done that from the pins. You know what, just to be bad, let's do that. Let's right click on here, do the and then attach that. Either way, that should work. So yay, let's do that. Let's do a compile, save. I'm going to close this box. We're going to cross our fingers, and okay, well, at least that other missile didn't move, right? So it's sort of doing what we want. Now we've got to check the other side of this equation, which is if we walk into here, will it move now? Fingers crossed, fingers crossed, fingers crossed. Dope! And this may be because of the movement back and forth of the X and the Y. So I'm actually going to go back to that and reset those positions to their original ones. So again, we're going to grab this. We're going to, oh, before I do that, let's see if it's this, because I did make this as a change. So right click, break, right click, break, right click, return to a single pin, pull out, type in break vector, X to X, Y to Y, compile, save, and play. Okay, I know why. And the reason why is because I did a copy and paste on this. This is missile 2, and for me, I think where is it? The event graph. We did this. But oh, it's in the AI maybe. This. My custom event is the same name as it is in AI 1. You wouldn't have this problem yet because it would have been the first missile that you were creating.
But since this is the second one that I'm creating, I already have an event called follow player. So I need a new event, a different custom event. So I'm going to delete that one, right click, create custom event. This one I'm going to call follow player 2. Should call it follow player also, because otherwise it sounds like follow player 1. We'll attach that, and then we need to change it here. And we want to make sure that we typed in everything exactly the same. We have no spaces. I typed those in, so that's dangerous. I like copying and pasting better. Okay, so now that has a unique name, and let's see if that made a difference. So we're going to minimize that box. We'll push play. And if not, it's probably because of the reversed data points. So let's go change our X and Y back. The other thing I want to do too, yeah, it does have floating pawn movement. It is seeing the mesh. See, this is a good troubleshooting right here. So let's do a Control W, and let's swap our values back. So Control C, drop that into the bottom box, Control V, grab the other one, Control A, Control C, drop it back into the top box. Do the same thing with the bottom one, Control C, drop it into Control V, and grab that number, Control C, and put it back into this box. Okay, compile, save, fingers crossed. Okay, only other thing that I can think of is we've made quite a few changes, so sometimes what I like to do is take this out of the mesh, drop it back in. We'll try that. See that. So basically I'm like refreshing it. See if it'll take. That wasn't it. So what we'll do next is we'll do a build for the paths, right? So build options, build paths, and let's do a building on navigation. Let's try that now. And still not getting it to recognize us. So what else can we do? I'm just going to see. Sometimes this works. It's definitely moving again. So by making it false, it has definitely started moving again regardless of what square we're in. So it's not that we messed up the movement for the box, it's that it's not recognizing our points maybe quite as well as we wanted it to. So let's go back to the AI. Oh, I think I know what I did. So that's AI missile, this one's missile 2, missile 2 self. Now it's listening to AI missile 2 when it's in the world and when it's been spawned. So that's correct. So that's missile 2. Missile 1 is listening to AI 1. Missile 2 is listening to AI missile 2. So let's go back here and see. So we have character 1, get player character. We have the capsule component for that character. We have the get world location. And then we're splitting the pin into X, Y, and Z. And we're adding those values up there. We're adding, the only thing I can think of is maybe my values are wrong.
Maybe I've got my x's where my y's should be and my y's where my x's should be. And let's put this back as a true statement. So we're going to right click, break the pin. Let's put that back in. Let's hit compile, save. Let's push play. Okay, so now we're not getting it to move. Okay, it's exploding again, which is good. And now it's just our data points. I think that's really the biggest thing. So let's go back to AI Missile 2. And let's try with new points. I'm just going to actually go in there and hit 0, 0, 0, or 0. Maybe I messed up on one of my points. I'm going too fast, or my eyes have gotten old and I got a number wrong. So we'll try that again. So we'll go to one edge. We'll go to geometry, basic shape. We'll grab a cylinder, put that more or less where we want the cylinder to be. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to just grab one point at a time. So I'm going to grab this point, do Control C. This is the one that's attached to the X. Control V. Don't need a 0 in front. Then I'll grab its Y position and drop that into the Y value as its min. Okay. Then we're going to go grab that other position, right? The adjacent one. Okay. So now we should have brand new X and Y values. So brand new X and Y values. And we'll grab just the one for the X. Control C. We'll drop it in there. Control V. And then we'll grab the new Y value. Control C. And we'll drop the in here. Control V. Okay. So, fingers crossed. Compile, save. Compile, save. Save. Did I put it way over there on that side? Okay, fun stuff. So, ran out of class today. It's already 2:53. Get out of the way here. I'll spend some time with this project figuring out where I messed up. And then I'll bring it to you, and then we'll see where Martin fudged on why it's not moving, but that's fine. And I just don't want to take any more class time trying to figure it out. But the videos are there, so let's go back to our other page. And let's go back to heal, and let's go back home.
Sorry.
There we go. And let's just look at, let me collapse everything. And at this point, all of 5 is there. So everything 5 should be there. We did finish 5 in class. You can turn those videos in when you're ready. And then lab 6 is what we're talking about today. What we would have covered would have been Lab 6A, which was the navigational mesh and navigation modifiers. And we were starting on Lab B and Lab 6B and Lab 6C. So what we do with Lab B is we set up the first zone, and then in Lab C we set up Zone 2 and Zone 3. So we actually do the same thing, but we set up multiple points with Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3. So we end up with 3 homing missiles in 3 platforms that will only interact when you walk onto their platform. So since that's what we're going to be covering on the next so as far as the way class is going to be in person when we get back on Monday. So the very next time I meet you guys, you will not see me as a cat. You will actually see me as a full human being with beard and balding hair and whatever other attributes I have. and it will be in the classroom at the West Loop campus in room C121 or C124. I forget. I think it's 121. Either way, those are 3 doors down from each other. So if you don't see me in one room, you can go into the other one. And I guess Mondays we will stick to the tradition of going over projects. So since I will actually be able to see you, you'll actually be able to break up into your groups, and we'll probably spend some of the time doing that. So you'll probably get a chance to do like an in-person meeting on Monday with your group. And in the first half of the class, we'll probably just go over the that last document that we didn't really get a chance to look at, which is in Project 1, which is this guy down here, the David Beckett thing. And we'll watch in class, I guess, these other 2 videos, just to sort of so I can have my commentary over it. And then that'll be it for Project 1. And remember that Project 1 is due on October the 11th. So the next time I see you guys will be October the 4th. So let's go into October. So there's today on the 29th, and October the 4th would be this date right here. So that's when we see each other in class, and the project is due 1 week after that on the 11th. Okay? So remember that project due means you come in formally dressed or business casual, khakis, some type of polo or a button up, and you can get as fancy as you want. I'll probably go in jewelry store fancy, so I'll show you what I look like when I would go to work. And what you would almost expect from any type of a formal meeting where, again, you're trying to get money from people. So we will see each other on the 4th. Project will be due on the 11th. We'll go over that again. But it's going to be, presentation, the paperwork, and your PowerPoint slide or whatever you're using for your lab, for the visual part of it. And so yeah, so this should be the last online class. Everything, if the world doesn't end before next week, I'll see you guys on Monday in class at the West Loop campus, C121. We'll be going over the last parts of the group project. Then you can break up. We'll spend the first half of the class going over that. We'll spend the second half of the class allowing you guys to break up into your groups and have a group meeting. And then we'll just see where we are at that point. And then Wednesday the 6th, we'll go back into Unreal. Thank you, brain. Had a brain fart there. But yeah, so Mondays will be project. Wednesday will be Unreal. The 4th will be in class. The 11th is when the project is due. Cool? Everybody excited? We're more than halfway.
yeah.
We're more than halfway through our labs. We're on lab. Yes, sir.
Professor, what about the 2 companies that you said that we
Yeah.
choose?
You need to choose those 2 companies, and you need to do research on them. What about them?
We've done the choosing and we started doing the research, but I guess
Cool.
James's question is when are they due? I'm assuming October 11th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All that information that you guys find will be an appendix on the back of your written documentation. So whatever you guys come up with, remember that I said that the written document is going to be the actual game proposal, plus each one's competitive analysis and SWOT analysis. So everybody in your group needs to do an individual SWOT analysis. Trying to say too much and not enough breath. Everybody will have to do an individual SWOT analysis, and everybody will do 2 companies. So then that way you have 8 companies total, or if you have 3 members in your group, 6 companies total to do your competitive analysis. So 2 companies per person, appendix in the back, SWOT analysis per person in the back as an appendix.
Sounds good.
All right, very cool. Now we've officially gotten to the 3 o'clock. So for those that need to mosey on, you're free to go. I don't have any new information for you today. We have one more on class line. No, I'm sorry. Next time I meet you guys, it's in person. That's right. This is Wednesday. So yeah, very next time I meet you guys, it'll be in person. And we'll go back into Project 1. So have a wonderful weekend. I would meet in my groups
see how much more information or, how much more of these things you can get going. And then we'll see everybody on the 4th in class if the world doesn't end.
So, Professor,
Yes, sir.
the verbal pitch is due on Monday too, right?
Everything is due on the 11th. Project 1 in its Project 1 in its
Sorry.
entirety. No, that's a good question. But Project 1 in its entirety will be on the 11th. So what will happen when you come in on the 11th is you'll walk into class. Everybody will break up into their groups. Group 1 will go over there. Group 2 will be in that corner. Group 3 will be in the other corner. And then I'll say, who wants to go first? You'll come up. Whoever is in charge of delivering the elevator pitch will deliver the elevator pitch. And then as a group, you will deliver your verbal pitch. As everybody doing their little section, and then you'll wrap that up. You'll ask for questions, and then you'll hand me your game proposal, the written document, prior to you guys going up there, right? So I ask who wants to go first. You give me a copy of your game proposal, the written document. I thumb through that as you guys are getting set up. Elevator pitch, formal pitch, and then you're done with this part. Then you will go more into
and we get into the fun part,
which is actually building the game. Yep.
Yeah.
The game proposal should also be fun, because this is where I call it like my brainstorming session for a game. You know what I mean? You're like trying to figure out all the cool stuff that you can. I think production is fun, but production is more frustrating because now you're it's sort of like the rubber meeting the road, and whatever happens. And sometimes that can be frustrating because you don't know how to do something. You're trying to figure out something. It's rewarding when you figure it out, but I think the funnest phase is actually pre-production, where I guess it also depends on who you are. If you're somebody that loves writing code or likes the art stuff, well, then maybe the production phase. But me, I'm more of a manager. If I'm on a film set, I like being an assistant producer. Oh, there went the bottom half of my microphone. Almost lost it. I have concrete floors, so anything that falls off of thankfully it has a wire on there, but that's not good for the wire to pull. But yeah, ooh, that was scary. Yeah, because I've gotten up and I'm walking around now. But yeah, if I like the managerial. Definitely. I like being a director or a project manager, or in this case, it would be a project manager, more or less. Okay,
You're
cool.
saying we've got a 48 days till the code freeze.
If you've actually counted that, yeah, and that sounds like
that's
you're
48 days starting. Sorry, 49 days from now.
okay. Well, that's still a lot of time.
Yeah, that's a lot of time.
That's still a lot of time. That's a how many did you say? 40. Divide that by 7. Tell us how many weeks that is.
That would be
Like 7 weeks?
7 weeks.
A little bit over
No,
7.
hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, it's 7.
It's like 7.
About 7.
It's a little 7 and change. So that's good.
Yeah.
So that means you have half the code right now, right, of what we're going to deal with, because we're in lab 6 now, where there's 12 labs total. The ones towards the end are more like finishing and polishing. So when we get through the lab 9, by the time you get through lab 9, you have all the elements that you need to make the actual designing for it. Everything else will be menus and then how to export, and then whatever your bonus lab is that you choose for yourself.
I have a question for Fizzle.
Sure.
So the labs that we're doing right now, working on our own world, is that the lab, like, are those the levels that we're going to have in our final project? Or are we going to have to start a new one for the final project, or connect the ones we already have?
No. So as you're building the labs are individual, and those are showing you the skills, right? So I'm basically going, here's addition, here's subtraction, here's multiplication, and those are yours, individual, and then you're going to have a test on it later, right? And that's your projects. Your projects is taking all the information that you learned in your labs and applying it towards the new one. So you will have to make it different, because in a group, maybe everything you've designed looks like like what we've been doing, which is an open area with mountains and things like that. But then in your group, you decide that you're going to do an outer space game. Well, you're not really going to be able to do.
I thought that we'd have to make a completely new one, because enacting our own ones might obviously not work.
No. What will happen is that everybody will make their own level inside the game, right? So
you have 4 members in your group, you should have 4 levels. You have 3 members in your group, you'll have 3 levels. And then you'll take everything that we did in the labs and apply it based on if it makes sense in your game. So maybe we learned how to do, let's say, setting up multiple zones, but in your game, you don't need multiple zones. So you don't have to use that skill in your game. But maybe your game uses very heavily, or maybe you learn how to take, I don't know what other skill, the enemy characters, and maybe you combine a couple of the enemy characters together, like different things. Like I'm going to take the exploding part from this one, and I'm going to take the respawning from that one, and then I'm going to take the X, Y, and Z from this one, and I'm going to merge all those different things together to create a new character, a new enemy character, because I wanted to do this and not what the other ones were doing. So then you're doing the opposite, right? You have to like build on those skills. So you're going to take them, combine them, and see how you can rearrange those puzzle pieces to create a new situation for your character. So that, yeah, definitely. And remember that all of us are going to do, every person will do an individual bonus lab. And that those bonus labs, now that you've already broken up in your group, you can focus on, maybe your bonus lab will be something that you need for your project. And that one I will allow. So whatever you do for your bonus lab, that'll be like you figuring it out to get lab 12 done. And then you can transfer that knowledge into your game directly. Or it could be you're working in your game to try to figure out that skill, and that will count as, you don't need to make another project and just incorporate that into that project. You can just open up the project that you're working on for your group and say, this is my lab 12, my bonus lab, and what I figured out was how to manipulate gravity. And here's how you do it. Here's my walkthrough. These are the different things that we're going to use in the level, and these are the things that I needed to change. So in lab 12, you get to make your own checklist, right? You're going to show me something that you learned, that you researched on your own. You went and found labs. I do have a couple of bonus labs already set up, right? So if you don't want to be very adventurous, you could just pick one of the bonus labs I've given you. Some of them are they're not easy, they're tough, but you have step by step from me, and then I know what's going on. I don't have to try to guess what you did later or watch those labs to try to figure out what you're doing. So if you don't want to be adventurous, you can pick from my bonus labs. But in that situation, yeah, I would allow you to work in your project and then use that to show me if it's a different skill. So that'll be the only one that you can do that with.
Cool.
Cool. Any other questions? Got a few more
I have a
minutes.
question, Professor.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, my problem is with my Unreal editor, because one time it's active, the next it crashed.
Okay, so you're still experiencing
So-
crashes. Have you done anything with your RAM as far as maybe beefing up your RAM? Have you watched any of my FYI videos to try to reduce the processing power on your graphics card?
No, because the issue is that I don't have a graphics card.
Every computer has a
Um,
graphics card.
Oh, I think it probably has one built in, but
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
probably, I mean, if
have-
you're on a laptop, it might be in the motherboard. If you're on a desktop, it might also be built into the motherboard, but there is a certain amount of RAM that's allocated for graphics. And what you need to do is you need to watch.
I know there was this video that one of my colleagues just sent me. I kind of saved the video for me to watch it later on YouTube.
Okay. If you
Because
want to,
from
if that's something that's publicly available, if you want to send me that link, so then that way I see what you're seeing. And then
Yeah.
that way when you talk about it, I'll be able to. Now, if it's not publicly available and it's your friend sending you a link and it's from somewhere, don't send it to me. But if it is a publicly available, like anybody could land on that page, send it to me. And then that way I'll
Yeah,
review it.
anything on that page, just from YouTube, as in how to check up your RAM information and all that.
Right.
That's what it is. You have to use command prompt or something.
Okay. Well, that sounds like if you're back inside of your computer. But yeah, so there, right there on the screen, you're seeing the FYI videos. The first one is just how to do organization in your world outliner, but the next two will definitely help. The first one reduces the amount of processing power that textures will take
right? So if you have a lot of different textures that you're using and all of them are very expensive, meaning that you've got them at full res, and remember that the texture is the skin on the outside of a static mesh, right? So if I put in a skin and that skin is never going to be seen up close, it's always going to be off in the distance, I don't need that skin to be at full resolution. It could be at half resolution, it could be at a quarter resolution, and that'll save processing power on my graphics card, which is why I think your computer is having problems. You don't have enough RAM and the graphics card keeps crashing because it can't keep up with what the program's asking it to do.
And then trying to make a door. That's what it is. I'm trying to make a door and an extra upper area for the staircase.
Okay, so
trying to
stretch
up the staircase.
Yeah, it's going to be again. It's going to be very difficult for me to kind of tech online, but since we are going to be seeing each other on Monday, you are on it's a laptop, correct?
Yes, I can bring it with me.
Bring the laptop. We'll take a look at it. We'll see what else is going on because I'm still also under the assumption that you are running your antivirus or your virus protection program on top of having low RAM. And anytime the computer reaches out, or even if you're on the internet and the computer reaches out because it's trying to do an update in the background, that takes whatever minimal processing power you have and just slams it. So that's maybe a lot of the, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because they might be doing updates in the background which are scheduled, or Microsoft is doing them automatically for you, or if you're on an Apple environment, same thing, it might be doing that in the background. And then it triggers your antivirus. No, I know, and I'm just thinking out loud. I'm just thinking of like different things that could be pulling processing power that could be running in the background without you even knowing it. You may also have other software that load and start working when you turn your computer on, right? Obviously, the operating system is one. You turn on your computer, you hit the power button, the operating system starts. But you may have other things that are running in the background
that I might not know of.
That you may not know. So what you may want to do is do a Google search on how to reduce or turn off the programs that would auto start on launch.
I think I can do that. I can just do a Control Alt Delete and see which programs are running in the background. You
can, but sometimes there's some that are yeah, you can do that and see what's up, but you'd have to do that each time. So there is a way that you can actually go in there and tell it just don't even run on startup, and then that way it won't be in the background. Like for example, like me, I think on the computer that I'm on right now, look at that list of. Oh, you can't see it. Yeah, because it's not showing up because
your Chrome is running and your
right. I mean, you can see those things, but like the thing that I'm looking at right now, NVIDIA settings are running in the background. Windows security actions required are running. OBS is running. Stream Deck is running. My X Live control panel is running. Epic Games is running. Teams is running. Autodesk app is running. What is this one? Splice is running. That definitely doesn't need to be on. My V control is running, which is I'm running. My monitors are touchscreen. This is a touchscreen, so there's 3 touchscreen options that are running in the background that are taking processing power. Zoom is on. My printer, there's a printer software that's running, and what's this last one? Also printer. So I almost have like 15 programs that are running in the background that, if I was on a computer with less power, would be sucking up juice.
If I have a gaming laptop,
if you've got Steam, if you downloaded Steam and Steam is on that computer, Steam might be running stuff in the background. It might be trying to do updates while the computer's on.
I don't have Steam.
No, well, what I'm saying is I'm just like naming off different things. It could be Epic Games, it could be Steam, it could be any other provider of video games or anything else. I have Adobe products on my computer. Adobe has a manager. That manager may reach out to the internet periodically and try to do updates, unless I've told it not to. And that can happen at any point, which is probably why you're experiencing sometimes it works okay and then sometimes it just totally crashes. And there's no rhyme or reason. There's no one thing that you're doing inside the software that seems to be triggering the event.
So it must be additional programs in the background chewing up space.
Yeah, I'll just check that out.
And another thing you could totally do is also keep your keep your computer offline, meaning that the internet itself, you've actually gone to the router, the Ethernet port for your computer and the wireless port, and actually turn them off.
Oh, just put it in airplane mode and just do whatever I can.
Well, if you're not on the internet, none of the software that's on your computer can reach out to try to do updates. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's another way that you could run your computer, is making sure that all network capability has been turned off. So then that way no piece of software can try to reach out. But worst case scenario, I'll see you on Monday and you can bring your laptop to me, and then maybe I can narrow it down instead of just being so, well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this.
Yeah. I understand.
I got a question too.
Sure, go ahead.
Professor. I have a weird bug where I get like the missiles to explode, which is fine. But if I go around a certain corner, one spawns way bigger than in a random location. I don't know what it is.
Okay.
Do you want me to share my screen so I can show you, or do you want to just wait till Monday?
Well, show it to me real quick. Explain this. Why? Oh, well, let me do the thing where you can share. Go for it.
Let me share my screen. All right. There we go. So, right, everything looks fine. Right, I can shoot. They don't move at me anymore after some of the code changes we did.
Mm-hmm.
And this is fine, right? All that's fine. But then that thing spawns.
Okay, so here's the thing. When you place the missile on the screen, you rotated the missile from its original XYZ axis. And it's also coming in on a respawn with something different. So click on one of the missiles. Okay, now go into the details panel for it. Get out of full screen view, so yeah. And then go to the details panel for it. Go down to its rotation. And let me move this box thing out.
Ah,
You see how its rotation is a little bit off?
yeah, it's set
You're
to
gonna
90.
you're gonna need to also, well, if you set it back, then it's gonna look like it's going in the other direction. So it needs to
Yeah.
be at 90. But when you do the respawn also needs to be at 90. So you're gonna need to go back into the enemy AI.
Hold on, let me try to get to it. The screen was blocking me. Hold on. Dang it, I had the enemy. Yeah, there it is. All right.
Okay. So you see where it's oh no, it's not in here. It's gonna be in the actual missile. So go to H missile 1. Okay, so there. You see where the spawn information is on the bottom right hand corner? Keep going, bottom right, bottom right, bottom right.
Oh,
Go-
there. Oops.
Your other right.
The other right, yes.
Okay. You see how you have spawn transform rotation?
Uh-huh.
So put in 90 for the Z axis. Down. No, that's location. No, that's location. Undo.
Ah.
Click undo. Because you have 90 now in that other box. You're going to have to do
Gotcha.
twice now. Undo. It's not 90. It's whatever number was there for the Z. Undo. Undo. Control Z. Control Z. There. Now you got 280. See how it's 280 up there? So now that one, where it says spawn rotation Z axis, make that one 90 degrees.
And keep the 280 on the Z.
Well, because that's, you want it to always, the first one is its location. The second one is its rotation. And no, the rotation you have, the Z is 280. That's not correct. It's going to turn it like almost 100. In rotation, you only have 360 degrees. So this is going to make it go off axis and point backwards if you leave Z at 280. Okay. On your screen, yes, up, that down, that group, Z, make that 90. Because you only need it to rotate 90 degrees.
Right.
So that it matches what the original missile is doing on the other side. So go ahead and do a compile save, and let's go back and see if that works.
So
So pop it.
Oh,
So it's facing the right direction. Now it's really, really
Oh,
big when they respawn. So do this. Do me a favor. Hit escape.
sure.
So I'm guessing that this is the original 1x1x1 size. See how your missiles down there, your scale, you made them 0.1425, 0.1425, 0.1425 for scale. Well, then you're going to need to go back on the respawn and make that respawn the exact same number. Because right now your respawn is telling you to come back in at a 1x1x1 size. It's gonna be wherever your respawn information is.
Which I
It's
think
not it's not in
was-
your AI. It's in the other one.
Yeah, it's gonna be in a missile.
Mm-hmm. So see there, bottom right hand corner. See where it says spawn transform scale? See how it's all 1x1x1? Next one
Yeah.
down, next one down, that one. See how that's all 1x1? What did you have it? 1.2, 1.425?
Right.
So yeah, so you're going to need to copy that and then place that into the transform. So then that way when it comes back in, it's not 10 times bigger than what you have it at.
Got it.
And they're all the
okay.
same numbers, so once you got one number in there, you can just copy paste them. Yep. Now do a compile and save. And just hit 1. I want to see that this one pops in back in the right place. So
Oh,
that
yeah.
location up there is incorrect. So what probably happened, go click on that missile, or I guess you can't because as soon as you hit escape, stand under it. Just go and stand under it. Okay, now hit escape. So this is telling you more or less, go and look and see where, go into your world outliner.
Okay.
You copied the scale, not the location. Yeah, that's... Oh. Well, where's... Okay, so here's the thing is, first of all, you have 2 missiles, right? And you only have 1 spawn location. So regardless of each one of these 2 missiles, you're only going to get them to be able to respawn in 1 location. If you want them to respawn in different locations, you have to have 2 separate missiles, 2 separate pawns. And they both need to be labeled differently. One would need to be labeled H-Missile 1, and then the other one would need to be labeled H-Missile 2.
Got
and
it.
then that way-
makes more sense.
And then that way one has its own location and the other one has its own location. But let's just take a look. Go click on, let's say the first one, the one on the left or the one on the right, doesn't matter. So click on that one. See its location. It's negative 3180 by, copy that real quick. All of them. Just do the thing in the middle and do the copy. Go back to your missile for the respawn. So some of that stuff is the same, some of it's different. And not there, you're going to want to do it in the one above, the one that says spawn transform location. Spawn transform location. The one above.
Yep.
Okay, so that negative 3100 is probably right. Click in the Y. Hit Control V to paste. And so the Y location was different. See how the Y location is 1370? And you can get rid of... Yeah, so that's probably why it's not. And you can get rid of the Y equals. And then do the same thing to the Z. And get rid of all the other stuff that's not Z. So Z's easy. Z is 100.
Well,
So just type
well,
in 100. Yeah.
yeah.
Do a compile save. And let's go blow this sucker up and see if it shows up in the same place.
Let's see.
So it's the one on the left that we assigned, right? So go to the one on the left. Okay, so it did indeed blow up. And let's see where it respawns.
Boom.
In the right
All right.
place. See?
Yeah,
that's-
that makes more sense now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think honestly that's why my my zoning didn't work, is probably something to do with my X, Y, and Z axis, is that I just need to go back and check. But it makes all the because the computer can only do what the computer's been told to do. Right? And us as human beings, we have to check and make sure that we've put everything. And that's the crazy thing, is you have so many things you have to keep track of.
You know what I mean? Here we have one missile, and we have all these different X, Y, and Z axes, rotations, and it's crazy to get everything like. And that's why I always do something, and then I go and check. I push play, and I see if it's working. And then I go back out, I do something, and then I push play and see if it's working. And then see it kind of jiggled a little there.
Why did it randomly decide to move now? It's just, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that might be because let's go and look at your timer. So go to your AI,
Yeah, let's see.
because the timer function would be here. So you have it on a time loop of 1. You have it looping, and scroll down a little bit. So that looks correct. Go over to the left a little, and that's what we have for that. Okay, so what we could do real quick is just disconnect the and from the condition from the branch. So go to the red one on the right hand side and right click and say break link to condition. See how condition's got a check mark, so it's still making the condition true. Hit compile and save, and then we can check and see if any of that stuff was messing with it.
All right,
Oh.
let's give this a shot. Let's try the
And
left
see if
one.
it jitters. If it doesn't jitter. So it's still it's moving erratically. So let's do this. Hit escape. And let's go to the missile itself, and we're going to go into the pawn movement or floating pawn movement. So this is going to be in your components panel. Components panel. Top left hand side. Yep, you're almost there. Up. Scroll down until you see the floating pawn movement. Click on floating pawn. And then over here, right? So we've got our max speed at 500, and we have constrained the plane to Z. You see down there at the bottom where you have done that?
Yeah.
So the only other thing is go to the viewport for this. And click, do you have a scene route? Go back up to the top on the components panel. Click on the scene route. Where is that inside of your... Grab the body and move it up.
Move it above.
Yeah, just grab the x-axis, the red one. No, not there. And the actual... Oh, yeah, just doing it.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Alright, that's why I was confused.
Yeah, and click on the body, and then just move the body up using the x-axis. I want to see where your scene route is. So I guess it's on the back. It's on the back end.
It's in here, in the back.
Okay, so it's on the back end.
Yeah.
The only thing that I think might be oh, you know what might be doing that? It might actually be that that change in scale. Remember how the thing was originally like 100 by 100 by 100, 1 by 1 by 1 when it was in scale, and then you scaled it down to 0.1, 0.2. So that might be changing its location, and that might be why it's a little jittery, because it might be going back to something like that. So that's one thing. The other thing is maybe go to where the missile is in the game. Zoom over to the left so that we can see it from the side. Okay, move it up and then move it down. Like physically grab it up and then shift it back down. And put it closer to the floor. Okay, too close.
Oops, yeah.
You're actually getting part of the navigation going over it, which was crazy looking. Anyways, so let's push play now. It's obviously going to respawn in the wrong location. We'd have to go back and change the Z-axis for the respawn, but let's see if we can get a slightly better movement. Oh, it is really jacked up. Do me a favor. Hit escape real quick.
Yeah.
And zoom up and down, zoom up and over so we can see the area like if we were looking at it bird's eye view.
Hold on. All right.
Yep, a little bit higher up though. The only other thing that I can think of is there may be, you know what else we could do, because it seems to be like jotting off to the right hand side, right? Let's go back into the missile and let's constrain its x-axis. So go back to location, or not location, go back to movement. It's gonna. Well, you have to be in the components panel. Scroll down until you see the
Oh yeah, the
floating pond movement.
Right.
And then go into constrain and click on constrain, and then use custom. See how there's a custom?
Uh-huh.
And you should now. Okay, just above. Where? Hello, 1, 2, check. What's going on with my mic? So that custom should have allowed us to be able to do multiple X, Y, and Z's. Go back into constrain plane.
Right now, Professor. So I'll just see you on Monday.
Yes, sir. Bring your computer with you, and then we'll take a look at that.
Yeah. I'll try to see if I can work.
Yeah, see how far you can get, and then we'll do that. I still think it feels like it should be in that custom setting. Go back to custom at the bottom where you were. Click on custom. Use global physics settings. What's that?
I guess that just defaults back to whatever the
Oh yeah. Okay. Go
physics
back
engine is
and
doing.
just make it. It should be in custom. Custom should allow us to be able to set up multiple. Go up one. You see how there's an extra. Well, there's that one. Yeah, that one. And constraint normal, constraint origin, constraint to plane. Let's go down a little bit. Let's say movement components. Do we have anything else that lets us to keep scrolling down? Okay, go back up. Snap to plane. That's stored. Let's actually type in. Let's see what your So the other I'm trying to think. The other thing, the other way we might be able to get this to work is it should. Let's do this. Let's go up and go to your components panel. Scroll up. Click on self. Go over to the details panel. See if there's any constraining for this. Nope.
Yeah.
The only other one may be on the scene route.
Do you think I should just redo my missile and maybe just eliminate all the factors of it going all wobbly? Sometimes that's just the best approach.
And I would say yes. Most people don't like to do that because like, oh man, I got to do it over again. But you know, it's cool, and
Yeah, exactly.
doing it over again may not be a bad thing. So yeah, you're going to have to create multiple missiles anyway, so you're going to actually get a chance to make homing missile 2, homing missile 3. And instead of doing a copy paste from homing missile 1 to homing missile 2, just start homing missile 2 from scratch. Build the whole thing, make sure it's the right size that you need. One of the things that you could also do is as you're building the missile, bring it into the game so that you can build it at the right size and everything stays one by one by one.
Yeah, that would make sense.
So then that way you don't have to.
I had to scale this down by a lot.
Big time. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think
where it felt like my scaling is 0.1.
it's 1/10 of the size of what it should be. Yeah, I think if it stays to the 1.1.1 size, it'll probably be and move and probably act a little bit better. But yeah, this is the fun of trying to get this stuff to work. You know what? Make it 1 by 1 by 1 here. And I just want to see if it works better. And then obviously you're going to have to...
It's the size of the damn thing.
Yeah, I know.
I'll give it a shot.
Make the navigation area bigger.
Oh yeah, it makes sense.
Just click on the navigation area and stretch the front end of that thing out. The green one. Yeah. And then just make sure, because it's not actually touching your floor. So you're going to have to push it down a little bit. Oh, well that too. There you go. That'll work. All right. And then you may need to make the missile actually, well, run over to it and see what it does. Okay, so it's still moved.
Yeah.
To the
I'm just gonna recreate it. Sometimes you just have to
restart. I almost feel like there may be, look underneath, grab your platform, that gray thing that you just stretched out. Move it up and out of the way, or move it somewhere out of the way. I want to see if there's not anything on the floor that might be obstructing Your missile? See, it is touching the ground, but I don't think the other one was touching the ground. Okay, bring your yeah, bring it back down and let's see if that makes a difference. Because it really looks like something's blocking it, like something's getting in its own way, and then
Yeah,
making it go to the
I don't
left.
understand what this gap is here. Why that is? Because it's going all the way. That's
Which
what
gap?
was confusing me.
Do you have a negative mesh modifier?
Let me see. Negative mesh modifier.
You could just go into your world outliner and type in nav, and anything nav would show up. So there's that second thing, recast nav mesh. What is that? Let's hit delete that.
That was weird.
Okay. All right. Now push play.
Now notice it came back when I did.
Yeah, I did. That's fine. Let's see if it redid the. Okay,
Oh,
now it's
going
moving.
straight.
Yes. Okay. So what happened was, yeah, and it's moving fast at you too now. So what ended up happening here was your navigational mesh needed to be rebuilt. You had put something there originally. An echo or a shadow of that was still there, and the missile had to go around that object because it was still blocking its path. So
Right,
maybe
now
what
I can-
happened, now it should
now
just
I
be,
can- Now I could just probably constrain it back to the plane, and that should.
and that should take care of it. Now it's not going to
Yeah.
be moving over to the side. That makes total sense. And when we got rid of that thing, what it did was it had to rebuild the navigational mesh.
Yeah, that makes sense. It was basically cached.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. This will be our.
Moment of truth.
Oh, boom! Yeah, no, that's it. Let's see where he spawns. Yep.
Yep, and it's respawning it at the smaller size. So the respawn still has the 0.1425 number.
Yeah, no, that definitely solved it. Just getting rid of the old cached.
Yep, navigational.
I guess it baked in what it was
Yeah.
doing before.
Yeah. And the computer's trying to save as much processing power as possible. It's a navigational mesh so that you can have multiple surfaces at different volume, at different levels. But then when it does itself, yeah, it's saving space.
Right. That makes more sense.
Cool.
Well, thank
we
you,
got
Professor.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So that's going to be the last question that I'm going to be able to take for today. I do need to move on and go over to my other job. But fun. We'll see you guys on Monday. We'll talk last things that we need for Project 1, break up into our groups, and then whatever individual problems we were having, like this person can't get their computer working or whatever, I'll try to address individually while you guys break up into groups. But you guys have a wonderful weekend. Go into your meetings, try to get as much work done as you can on the group project, try to do that research for the individual companies, and then do your own SWOT analysis. So that way you actually have something to show me on Monday. All right. Y'all take care. Have a wonderful day.
Take care. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Have a nice day, Professor.
You too. You take care. Let's go ahead and end meeting. And then turn the stream off.